What is happening out there, rotoscouts football fans? Week 2, gang. We're finally at it for week 2. Last week, we left everything to Saturday. We ended up going almost 4 hours on the Saturday show. Decided to start a little bit earlier this week, just in case we go the length of Gone with the Wind. A little bit longer than The Irishman. A little bit longer than Titanic. A little bit shorter than The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King Extended Edition. Still haven't checked out how that syncs up, but one of these days I got to get around to that. Handful of people watching. Interesting week 2 ahead. Should see a big uptick, I think, in some performances from some of our key quarterbacks, some of the guys that let us down last week. Got some key returners, or people returning, like Travis Kelce. Got some injuries to talk through, changing situations like the Baltimore backfield to talk through. We've got messy things like a highly projected Daniel Jones in my model to talk through. We're going to go through game by game. We're going to take a look at the different players. Probably not go crazy deep like last time into, some of the guys just trying to figure out who the hell these guys are, what role they're going to play on the roster. Now we've got a little bit more of an informed board to work with. We can look at some of the targets, some of the target shares and everything from last week, how some of the offenses broke down. We'll kind of dig into this one, but let's say hi to everybody. Po Degen Stoner was the first one here. He was here about a half hour ago just hanging out. Wake and Bake DFS football from Garden City, Colorado. How's the bodega tuna salad today, he says. I actually went for the croissant from the bakery down the street. Had a little coffee from down there earlier. The bodega, though, sold me a pretty expired seeming thing of half and half. I don't know. You know the little, floaties? When you pour milk into coffee and it's not quite good, you get those little brown floaties. Got a lot of those. So I decided to walk on down the street, grab a coffee and a croissant down there. Good little French bakery. They win all kinds of awards for their croissants. There's a few of them. I forget what it's called. Got Vic David Figueroa. Vic's here from Boston. What's up, Vic? Stephen B's here. Solid picks. Aloysius. Curds, says Vic David. Yeah, that's probably what they're called. Yeah, appreciate that. Yeah, never good. Tasted a little off, not like didn't make me sick or anything, but tasted a little sour, a little off. So, they charged me probably a 40% markup for the expired cream. They're expired half and half. Not too happy about that. I did let them know the other day. I was like, dude, you guys got to do something. The owner guy was there. I was like, you guys, your markups are going a little insane. I could walk an additional block in the other direction and buy all this stuff 40% cheaper. Doesn't really make sense outside of my laziness. But anyway, it's been a nice, good Saturday. We've got projections updated up on the site. All the rankings are updated. The values, the point scoring rankings, the value rankings, all the projections, player by player. What else is up there? The groups and stacks article, the first cut of that is up there. I hope to dig in on that a little bit more, maybe add some bonus information around who would I nudge to make sure I'm getting a little bit more, a little bit less. A few more running backs in it this time around. A lot of guys kind of involved in, some involved running backs that I added into some of the stacks. Had some questions in the Discord about how to handle that groups article. If you've got any questions, ask them in here. Pop into the Discord, ask them in there. We can always talk about lineup construction. Basically, we're always looking to stack. And then the key question that I got was, am I always looking to have a run back play against my stack? And that's the way that the groups article's set up. Nothing exists in an always kind of a situation, though. Like if I'm building out a pool of 5,000, 10,000 lineups that I'm going to sort through, I'm going to be toggling things on and off. I'll run a couple sets of lineups that just, tell it the most basic stack, just like a quarterback and a pass catcher and nothing else. I'll run ones that are just I'll dash off just to make sure I've got appropriate distribution of different things. I'll run off individual lineup build pools or crunches, whatever you want to call them, set to just one quarter. I'll say, all right, just give me 300 Joe Burrow lineups. And then I'll get my distribution of Joe Burrow with his stack guys with and without the components from the other team. A big distribution of other things that fall into, like we talked about last week, you build the net and you let everything else fall into it. So that's kind of how I go about building those lineups. But yeah, none of that exists in a complete vacuum as far as I always have to have this. My preferred construction is to have usually a skinny stack with a run back. I usually prefer to go, quarterback, pass catcher, and then a pass catcher coming back the other way. And then I might have a second stack in there where it's a pass catcher against a running back or a pass catcher against another pass catcher from a different game. I'm totally open to having double stacks in my lineups, of course. You want to capture those blowouts when they happen. Typically, those do, I think, demand even more that you want to have the run back play in along with a double stack. Less so in the skinny stacks. But my preference is always to have it. Just like to capture that upside. You know, you want to have the games where they're going back and forth and where they're forcing a little bit of the action from the opponent's side. So it looks like we've got a bit of a quorum. 16 people here hanging out so far. I'm sure we'll have more trickling in as the show goes on. But why don't we load this thing up? Let's start taking a look. Overall board. So we're going to bounce around a little bit. We've got the overall board, but then I broke it out positionally, like you guys may have seen on the Thursday show. So I think it's a little bit cleaner rather than having one big board where it's like some stats, no stats, and we're trying to figure it out and bounce through it that way. Feels a little bit cleaner to do it this way. But just looking at, we'll start here each time because this is where the fantasy projections are going to be. And this is where we're going to see the Vegas info, some of the yardage info, the defenses. So just to get us kind of started out, looking at the Vegas board, 51.5 point total is our highest. That's the KC Jacksonville game. I think we all can figure out that that one's probably going to, or at least that one's got a pretty good chance of shooting out, having a pretty high scoring affair with the Trevor Lawrence, Calvin Ridley connection. They've got some weapons on that team with Etienne and Christian Kirk and Evan Engram. And then obviously the explosive upside of the Patrick Mahomes and Kelsey combo. And then if any of these guys can manage to catch the ball, a little bit of upside for the passing game in general there. Jacksonville not populating in the defense numbers from last year. Apologies for that. That's because they changed it to JAX instead of JAC. It used to be JAC, and FanDuel changed that, and they changed the abbreviation for the Washington Nationals, I think, finally. They went from WAS to WSH. I think that was it. But yeah, arbitrarily decided to change that, but don't worry about that. Obviously, with Kansas City, we've got a terrific offense, but kind of limited defenses on both sides of these. 26th ranked defense projected by DVOA for Jacksonville, 29th. Excuse me, the other way around. Yeah, 29th for Kansas City. Gets confusing when I'm looking at the opponent rankings. Got to keep track of which team I'm talking about here. So I think that one is like super obvious up at the top. Biggest total in Vegas, obviously. We've got to dip down to several games in this territory, right? 47, 46. Kind of a wide swath of games here, and it's mostly the teams that you would expect before we take a big dip from 45 down to the 40-point range with some of the lower-end operations here. So some of these teams are obvious. Buffalo makes a ton of sense. Vegas on the other side of that game. At least you've got a couple explosive players in that Vegas offense. So I do think there's a little bit of opportunity in that game to support both sides, but Buffalo is favored by 9 points. The Seattle-Detroit game could get interesting. If they manage to keep the pressure off of Geno, if he's able to sling the ball around, I can see this one maybe shooting out a little bit, but Detroit fairly heavily favored in this one. But good skill players on both sides in this one. Halfway decent quarterbacks on both sides in the Seattle-Detroit game. Baltimore-Cincy, Joe Burrow was a disaster last week, but it's a realistic opportunity for some scoring on both sides. We kind of know where it's coming from. Assuming Mark Andrews plays, he's obviously Lamar's number one target, but we saw a great game out of Zay Flowers. Odell's on that offense. We've got the messy running situation here, so I think that supports a little bit more passing volume maybe than we saw last week from that team. Cincinnati's obviously just going to pass better. I think that's a nut low passing game from Cincinnati's offense probably all year, probably for the next few years of Joe Burrow's career. That was just god-awful. This one I kind of think is going to be a little bit more of a slugfest. 46 points feels a little high in that one. Kind of feels like San Francisco might just run off and hide. Play defense, keep the Rams off the board. Not sure how I feel about that one. This one I think could definitely see a little bit of offense, especially on the Chargers side. We've got a nice meaty projection for Justin Herbert. 45-point total. Chargers only favored by 2.5, so kind of a tight line there, and just a funnel defense for passing. So I like the upside for him. And then on the other side, maybe you get the Henry game, maybe you get the D-Hop game. He's questionable, if memory serves. That's another thing I got to build in here is a better way to track some of the Q tags. And then after that game, we kind of just dropped down to this dismal like Chicago, Tampa Bay, Green Bay, Atlanta. Some skill players in these games. some okay options. I do have Danny Jones, like I said, highly projected. Makes me uncomfortable, but I think he's going to have a better opportunity to have a good game than he did against Dallas. This Houston-Indy game could be maybe a little bit sneaky, just because another spot with like two pretty lousy defenses, teams that may be playing at a fast pace again, may sling the ball around a little bit. I don't love it, but I think there's some interesting spots in that one. This Denver-Washington one doesn't really do much for me. And then the Jets are going to get smoked by Dallas. So it's an interesting board. It breaks down pretty straightforward in terms of where the obvious offense is. But I think there's going to be a lot of interesting plays to go through. So we get started with this one. Fanatic says you can't get much worse than last week. Only way is up. Yeah, for Joe Burrow. Yeah, absolutely. That was a mess. We'll get to that one in a little bit. But yeah, just I had fair share of them. Just a total mess. So to start us off, we'll get to that one right now, I guess. Baltimore-Cincinnati. Going alphabetically through the list. Apologies if we jump around time-wise. I just didn't have, I'm not going to sit here and put these games in time order. Things need to be sorted certain ways. So 25th ranked defense, projected defense by DVOA for Cincinnati, 19th for Baltimore. So the upside for offense for sure. Both quarterbacks projecting out fairly well. Some of their supporting skill players projecting better than others. Jamar, obviously a disaster game along with Joe Burrow last time out. Still a monster projection. Mixon, an okay option at running back. And T. Higgins, obviously. So you've got three prime skill players here. And then you've got Tyler Boyd kind of just hanging out here with medium type projections. And I think he's actually kind of going to be a little bit sneaky in this one. I kind of like it. We see it a couple times a year. Tyler Boyd has those big games. So he could be a little bit sneaky. Irv Smith, kind of an afterthought, projects out okay. Just on the idea that there's going to be offense and the idea that there's going to be targets spread around to these guys, you have to think that Joe Burrow is going to be completing more of his passes. So it's a functional offense here, several different ways. Less functional on the Baltimore side. Obviously, you've got Lamar. You can play Lamar on his own without any of his pass catchers. He could run the ball in 2-3 times in the game and just dominate the entire thing, especially with the question marks in the backfield for this team. But he does have capable pass catchers. Zay Flowers had a nice breakout last week. Andrews should be coming back from injury. And then Odell, Rashad Bateman, a little bit less so. Isaiah Likely will probably be, he was really held in check last week and then probably likely diminished with the return of Mark Andrews. I think a lot of us got disappointed by Isaiah Likely last week. I had way too much. That wasn't a good spot. I also had picked him up in season long in my main league where I have Mark Andrews. I just figured, well, Likely's going to get those looks there. I thought it was justified. He'd been good in that role in the past, but did not work out. Vic David asks, any UFC tonight? Not to sidetrack. Poe DJ nailed it. Don't think Terry does MMA stuff. Yeah, feel free to chat about MMA, UFC, whatever's going on in the chat, and happy to read everybody's thoughts. But yeah, that's not my spot. No projections, no nothing for right now. Anyway, at the site, so that's not us. I would encourage everybody to go check out Stochastic stuff for UFC. Those guys have been crushing it for quite a while now. They know what they're talking about with that. But yeah, I was always more a boxing fan than an MMA fan in general, anyway, and just never really got into it for DFS purposes. My biggest thing with MMA is I feel like too many of the matches just end where it's just a submission hold, something on the ground. Like if I'm gonna watch a combat sport, I want to see punches and kicks, and keep them on their feet. That was always me. But I understand the appeal of the sport, and obviously you do get those crazy knockouts, some brutal, just beatdowns in general. So let's take a hop over here. We'll look at the disaster starting with Joe Burrow. How does this look on your guys' screen? Does it look all right? I know it's a little bit blurry. I'm trying to fit as much as I possibly can on here, while keeping it a little bit sane. So Burrow last time out, 14 of 31, just a total disaster. 82 yards, no touchdowns. Intended air yards per attempt, 7.1 yards. It's not exactly what you want to see, but it's certainly higher than what Lamar was doing. Lamar completed 17 of 22 passes, high completion percentage, but only threw for 169 yards. Pretty low volume in terms of only throwing the ball 22 times. Yards per attempt, 7.7, but only 4.7 air yards per attempt, only 4.6 intended air yards per attempt. Burrow had a low air yards per attempt because it was counting, that's counted against completions. The intended number, he was trying to throw deep. They just weren't completing passes. Or not crazy deep because these are attempts. So no attempts over 20, 30, 40, 50 yards. 3 attempts over 10 yards. So not crazy deep, but deeper than Lamar was, obviously, is the point there. Defensively, Cincinnati was allowing a 10.9-yard ADOT last week. They gave up 144 passing yards and a touchdown. Baltimore gave up 196, 4 yards per pass attempt. Cincinnati was giving up 4.5. Baltimore was blitzing on 34.3% of the possessions, 26.4%. So Lamar's going to be seeing less pressure. 5 sacks to 3. So I'm not really worried about either of these quarterbacks in terms of seeing pressure, staying upright. Obviously, they've both got the ability to scramble. Burrow might still be a little bit limited in his scrambling by the leg injury, but both of these guys, it's not really an issue in terms of the pressure, especially with the two defenses that they're going to be facing. Not a major factor, just really a matter of whether they're going to complete their passes and what the volume is going to look like on Lamar's side. I do expect an uptick for him, given that we're dealing with kind of a messy ground game. We're going to be seeing some Gus Edwards and Justice Hill, I think, primarily splitting the opportunities. Kind of like what it looked like last week after Dobbins went out. 23% snap share. 23% of the snaps for Gus. 8 carries for 32, 4 yards per attempt. 3.3 yards before contact, but only 0.8 yards after contact. Justice Hill, only 0.6 yards after contact, 0.5 yards before. 30% of the snaps. 8 carries for 9 yards. Did score twice, ridiculously. So he poached the red zone looks from Gus Edwards. Not a great situation, though. And now they've got Melvin Gordon officially on the roster. So who the hell knows what that's going to look like? Just kind of uncomfortable across the board. I don't know how much we really want to go to this running game. Each of these guys has a little bit of talent individually, but I really don't know where the ball's going to be going. I don't know what the volume is going to look like, and most importantly, I don't know who's going to be bringing it over the end zone, over the goal line. So it just gets a little bit complicated. Gordon on DK. Oh, ignore the DK captain pricing. That's just a multiplier for showdown. Gained a column there. Do I have that on the others? On the Cincinnati side for the rushing game, Mixon 62% of the snaps. Trayvon Williams lost 29%, but Williams, only 2 carries, 7 yards. Mixon's obviously the featured back here. 7,200 on FanDuel, 65 on DK. 13 carries, 56 yards. Not an impressive Joe Mixon game by any means. Had a run over 20 yards, 22-yard long. Did get 5 targets, caught 3 balls. In terms of the defense that he's going to be facing, 3.1 yards per rush attempt allowed, though. So a little bit limited there. Only allowed 72 rush yards a game, or allowed 72 rush yards last time out. Whereas the Baltimore backfield is going to be facing a team that gave up 5.2 yards per rush attempt last time out. Gave up a touchdown, allowed 206 yards on the ground. A little opportunity, I think, on the ground for the Baltimore side. I just don't like the situation with the 3-headed backfield, or even if it's just 2-headed between these two guys. I don't love it. Mixon I trust a little bit more, but you get a lot of these type of games out of Joe Mixon. 55, 75 yards, no touchdown, handful of touches, handful of catches. Don't really love it. This is where I think we get a little bit more action. A little bit in the passing game in this one for sure. You could definitely stack this one up with pretty good options for guys coming back the other way. You can use Andrews as a run back play in a Burrow, Chase, Higgins, Burrow, Chase, Boyd, Burrow, Higgins, Boyd type stack. You can obviously go to any of the wideouts. I like the opportunity for Zay Flowers. He saw 10 targets, caught 9 of them last week. No touchdowns, only a 2.8 yard ADOT, which is a little bit concerning, but a pretty monster target share. Odell had a 13-yard ADOT, 18.5 yards per catch, but only saw 3 targets, 2 receptions. I got to get the routes run info in here, I know. Ran out of space, ran out of time, and need to find a good source. Trey says MLB, I just picked and prayed one line to keep the streak. I didn't even play. Nothing in today for MLB. So Flowers is interesting. Odell was out there for 92% of the snaps, but again, only limited target share, limited action. Did have the one catch above over 20 yards for 29 yards. 4.5 yards per pass attempt allowed, 144 yards and a TD by the Cincinnati D. Only 4 yards per attempt, but 196 yards allowed by Baltimore. Should be some opportunity for Cincinnati. Down the list for Baltimore, Rashad Bateman, 3 targets, 3 catches, only 35 yards, an 8-yard A-dot. Okay, mix and match kind of a guy. He's cheap enough at 51, 57. A little bit more expensive, though, than Odell. And I don't know. It's in terms of the downfield action, Odell was getting a little bit more of an average depth of target. I feel like Odell's going to get a little bit more of the looks in the end zone. And just if I can get him a little bit cheaper, it probably renders him a little bit more popular. But if you're looking at a guy who was out there for 92% of the snaps versus a guy who was out there for 39%, you've just got the opportunity for more volume for Odell. Likely, like I said, probably a little bit limited given the return or the expected return of Mark Andrews. Still not 100% confirmed, but all signs seem to be pointing toward Andrews coming back. Last season, Andrews, 7.5 targets a game, 5 TDs, 7.5 yards per target on 7.5 targets a game, a 9.7 yard A-dot. We know he's one of the best tight ends in the game. Obviously, an easy go-to combo with Lamar. That would probably be my highest owned pass catcher quarterback combo when I'm going to Baltimore. It'd probably be Mark Andrews. Just a lot of trust built up over time. 6,300 on DK, 8,000 on FanDuel. Obviously, you're paying a big ticket to get to him. He's just coming back from the injury. But a lot of trust, a lot of looks for Mark Andrews in the red zone. So I like that option. Nothing downboard. Devin Duvernay played 11% of the snaps, didn't get targeted. Charlie Kolar's not going to see any action as a tight end option there. Nelson Aguilar is apparently on the team. Don't know if he's going to play. Then you've got the big-time receivers on the other side. Jamar Chase, 5 catches for 39 yards, 9 targets, 29% target share. Certainly a lot of volume, but definitely not the game that a lot of people were expecting when they took him top 3 overall in the season long. 9.9 yard A-dot. Obviously had some looks, only at 12 yard long. No drops, no looks in the red zone because this team didn't do much of anything. I think you go right back to the well with Jamar Chase. I don't worry about it at all. 7,900, 8,400. You're paying a big ticket price, but he's a big ticket receiver. Definitely a guy who can deliver for us. Chase last year, 10.3 targets a game. We know he's a monster. 9 touchdowns, over 1,000 yards, 7.81 yards per target. Right there with him, though, T. Higgins, 10.9 yard A-dot, 1,029 yards, 7 touchdowns. And Tyler Boyd, not to be ignored, 9.2 yard A-dot, 5 receiving touchdowns, 9.29 yards per target. Kind of a sneaky threat there. I like the opportunity for Tyler Boyd at cheap, 3,800, 5,300. Maybe get in the end zone. I think it's an opportunity against the scheme as well. Pretty sure they that I read that they suck against. I got to bounce around to some of these notes. Pretty sure scheme-wise they're weak against slot receivers. Let me get to... Bear with me. Let's see if I have the numbers. I don't have the numbers handy, but they were weak against the slot. Let's put it that way. So it could be a good opportunity for Tyler Boyd. Irv Smith, just kind of a limited tight end. Did see 5 targets, 3 catches, 17 yards. Only a 5.4 yard A-dot, though. So just kind of working around the line of scrimmage. Boyd only saw a 2.7 yard A-dot. But given what he saw last year, I think we've got reasonable expectation for a little bit deeper of targets. No drops for him. Higgins had a drop. Irv had a drop. Higgins is not uninteresting. Also, 6,400, 7,000. The 1A to Jamar's 1. despite the fact that he went over. No catches on 8 targets. A little bit concerning. 25.8% target share, but obviously the upside is there for days from a guy that we've seen score a significant number of touchdowns, the guy that's been very highly involved in the offense, sees 90+% of the snaps, 18.9 yard ADOT as well, so a deep threat. A lot of upside for the T. Higgins play. Bottom of the board here, just, nothing to speak of with the Irwins, the Samples of the world, just backups, depth chart options. So I do think 2 fairly high priority stacks. I prefer the Cincinnati side. I like the individual upside of Lamar and then any one of his guys. I don't know if we get a monster game from this team in general where it's Lamar +2. I think it's more a Lamar +1 situation. Cincinnati side, I could see a Burrow +2. I could see definitely 2 of his pass catchers coming through. You could get that off the Burrow Mixon and a pass catcher type game. He's in the pool for our stacks. Mixon did see 5 targets last week, 3 catches, 3 catches, no looks in the red zone, no receiving touchdowns, but was involved in the passing game as usual. Let's keep it rolling. Chicago, Tampa, 40.5 point total. Tampa favored by 2.5. The better quarterback is on the Chicago side. The better receivers probably on the Tampa Bay side. Evans and Godwin over DJ Moore, I think. DJ Moore and Darnell Mooney, I guess. Don't love either one of these stacks, but they're both going up against pretty weak defenses. Tampa Bay, 20th ranked, projected by defensive DVOA. 31st for Chicago. So there should be some opportunity here for sure. Justin Fields projects out fairly well. Can always run the ball in even if he's not having a good game throwing the ball. He does have some interesting targets in DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, to a lesser extent Chase Claypool. I greatly prefer Baker Mayfield's targets with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin specifically. Trey Palmer got involved a little bit, but just kind of a limited quarterback. Baker Mayfield, even with those options, does not project out well at all, even against a bad D. And Vegas isn't really seeing a ton of points in this one. So, limited, where, limited QB. If it's a limited QB where Vegas is giving them some points, seeing it tick up a different way, maybe I'm a little bit more interested for cheap pricing for DFS. But it's just it's a tall order to ask for Baker Mayfield to succeed. I am more interested in Fields. He's expensive, though, and we can hide this captain. That makes more sense. I was like, wait a minute, 11,000 on FanDuel. That's crazy. 8,000 on FanDuel, 7,600 on the DK slate. That makes a little bit more sense. Very playable quarterback. Looking into the numbers, both of them saw decent volume last week. 37 pass attempts for Fields, 34 for Mayfield. Fields, a little bit better of a game in terms of the yardage, but Mayfield threw 2 TDs. Intended air yards per attempt tells a different story. Mayfield was airing it out a little bit more, 7.4 intended air yards per attempt versus 3.1 for Justin Fields, keeping it kind of limited, keeping to a lot of checkdowns. Only 2 pass attempts over 20 yards, only 1 over 20 yards for Mayfield. A lot of opportunity allowed by these teams. 7.1 yards per attempt allowed in the air by Tampa Bay. 8.5 yards. Allowed 8.5 yards allowed by Chicago. 3 touchdowns allowed versus 2 touchdowns allowed. Not that much in terms of pressure. 27% pressure rating for Tampa Bay. 16.7% pressure for Chicago. Both these quarterbacks should have a little bit of opportunity to look. Obviously, Fields can get out and run with the ball. They weren't really running design plays for Fields last week to run the ball, though. Kind of just letting him sling it around. I expect that to change. So we'll probably see a little bit more upside in the ground game for him. Speaking of the ground game, kind of limited across the board in terms of production last week and a lot of divided opportunities on the Chicago side. 36% of the snaps, 39% of the snaps, 28% of the snaps. That's not really helping anybody. In terms of the target share, we saw more targets for Rashawn Johnson with 7. But all 3 guys were kind of involved in the passing game as well. 5 targets, 3 targets, 7 targets. Just kind of an ugly 3-headed monster. All of them are relatively affordable. They don't project out particularly well. Where are they? Herbert in the 8s. Both these guys in the 5s. Pretty limited, and I think they cap one another's ceilings until there's a little bit more clarity. Just kind of makes it a little bit of a limited situation in my mind. And that's not really the kind of a thing that I'm looking for, especially at running back for DFS. We just want to book a lot of volume. Obviously, we're looking for talent. We're looking for opportunity. We're looking for guys who are playing bad defenses, so on and so forth. But primarily, I just want to see a lot of, for sure, volume. With Rachaad White on the Tampa Bay side, at least you had 79% of the snap shares, 17 carries, only 39 yards, 2.3 yards per attempt, pretty ugly. 1.2 yards before contact, 1.1 yard after contact. None of these guys, everybody's getting hit relatively early. Nobody's really excelling in the yards after contact. 2.2 yards for Rashawn Johnson, leading this group from last week's results. Each one of the guys from the Bears had a 10-plus yard run. Longs of 12, 11, and 11. They're hilariously similar on that side. I do think there's a little bit more upside for White. Only 2 targets, did catch both of them. Going up against a defense that was allowing 2.9 yards per rush attempt. Give up 92 yards and a touchdown last week. If you're looking for a back from this game for some reason, I think Rachaad White is probably your guy. That said, don't love it. Kind of prefer the passing game here. It's going to be kind of a common theme. The running back position, really, there's your keystone running backs, your obvious guys. If you can leave money on the table and pay up for your obvious guys, I think that's just kind of worth doing a lot of the time. And then there's maybe some dart throws, some guys that get involved in the passing game. There's a lot of just meh at the running back position a lot of different weeks. This is the other game still? I was like, wait a minute. Just talked about these guys. Don't need to go back in time. We're already taking too much time. DJ saw 92% of the snaps. Darnell Mooney, the clear number 2, saw 84%. Chase Claypool, though, 78%. Only saw 2 targets. Probably expect that to change. Probably expect 2 targets for DJ to go up as well. Caught both of them, but only a 5.6% target share. Mooney got 19.4% of the targets, and Cole Kmet got 19.4% of the targets, 7 apiece. You have to expect that DJ is going to see more volume, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Chase Claypool see a few more looks either. I think he's kind of sneaky. I think he's a talented guy going up against a defense that allowed 7.1 yards per pass attempt, 328 yards, and 2 touchdowns with a 6.8 yard defensive ADOT. There's a little bit of passing upside on the Chicago side here. Claypool's really cheap, $32.52. Cole Kmet, a relatively affordable tight end who could potentially get involved. 5 catches, 44 yards on 7 targets. Not ideal. 2 targets in the red zone, though. You got to like that. With tight ends, a lot of the time, I'm just looking for those red zone targets unless I'm going to one of the Mark Andrews, Travis Kelce type tight ends. A lot of the time, we can just look to those, guys like this who might get a couple looks in the end zone, saw a little bit of volume anyway, is a guy that they're expecting to do a little bit for them. Bottom of the board, I don't think we need to really dig in on multiple tight ends with Robert Tonyan, Mercedes Lewis, Tyler Scott. Super deep type tournaments. I mean, Robert Tonyan was on the field for 5% of their snaps. They were kind of straightforward in who was out there and who was getting the looks and who was getting the opportunities. Could either one of these guys catch a stupid touchdown? Sure, but it's not a showdown slate. They're more involved in a showdown type slate. I don't think even in your super large field tournaments that they're worth all that many darts. Not seeing all that much volume. Tyler Scott did get 2 looks. 7 yards per catch with a 2 yard ADOT. Probably not the guy. 3,400. Definitely like the receivers, as I've said, on this side. I think Trey Palmer's kind of interesting at 5,000. Got 3 looks. Was out there for 34% of the snaps, so not crazy volume. Only a 4.3 yard ADOT. But just as the third banana here, where everybody's going to be looking in Mike Evans' direction, Chris Godwin's direction, justifiably so, Evans saw 31.3% of the targets last week. Monster target share with 10 looks. Got in the end zone. 66 yards on 6 catches. Godwin did his usual thing. 6 looks, 5 catches, 51 yards. A-dot wise, only 6-yard A-dot for Godwin. Evans was the deeper target. But I do think Godwin wise, last year only a 5.7 yard A-dot, but still accumulated 1,000 yards, 3 touchdowns, 7.2 yards per target, was giving us 5.1 after the catch. So a dynamic receiver when you get the ball in his hands, even if he's not catching it way downfield. So I like both of those options. If you're inclined to go toward one or the other, they're both on the field basically the same amount. You can expect weeks where Godwin outstrips Evans in terms of the target share. They both get a pretty decent target share either way. They're both in play. You can play both of them, but then you're asking quite a bit of Baker Mayfield. So I'm probably just looking to go like Mayfield +1. I think with both these quarterbacks, it's probably better to be looking +1 rather than +2. The idea of Justin Fields going nuclear without, spending one of their touchdowns running it in is kind of thin. The idea that it would be Justin Fields, DJ Moore putting up a big score and a Claypool or a Mooney or a Kmet, it gets a little bit thin around that, especially given the Vegas total. Definitely some opportunity around the bad defenses, though. Going to need Tampa Bay to keep up. What's going on in the chat? Vic David says, NASCAR not my thing, but I'll accept knowledge. I've actually done well in DFS NASCAR before and know nothing about the sport. I mean, like microscopic amounts of information that I've just absorbed through osmosis over the years. But I understand how to play NASCAR for DFS. Kudos to the guys from Stochastic. I actually did a couple NASCAR shows over there where I was the host, just kind of asking questions because as the host, you don't really need to know anything. So I learned a little bit about how to play NASCAR. I know more about DFS NASCAR than I know about NASCAR itself, but I wouldn't want to try and project it. I wouldn't want to try and cover it or anything. But it's fun. Definitely always fills that NBA All-Star weekend. I've mentioned it before. I played the one NASCAR slate last year on NBA All-Star week, and I took 4th for a decent payout. And I played 2 hockey slates all last year. One on opening day, didn't do great, and then one on NBA All-Star week, and I won. Took down a solo big the tournament on FanDuel. One of the bigger tournaments of the year too, because NBA was off. Shout out to Pete the Heat. Yep, Pete knows his stuff. Chris Pennell's doing his own content for NASCAR too. There you go. Lone Wolf's here. What's up, Lone Wolf? Gotta get one of those little like DJ boards and get everybody like a little sound effect. Like Poe DJ and Stoner says hi and it just goes like for a bong hit. Lone Wolf says hi and it gives us like a oh. I like that idea. Because I need something else to click on here. I need something else to distract me from just talking about fantasy sports, the thing that everybody's here for. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Handful of folks hanging out with us. Let people know show's going on. They'll find it. Saw a ton of views for last week's show, which was 4 hours long. We miss anything here? We're basically skipping over talking about defenses. Defense for me is just kind of plug and play, whatever fits. Obviously, I'm looking for the better ones, but we've seen how defenses go. So I don't really dig in too much on play this defense, play that defense. Feel free to share any opinions you guys got. I'm happy to talk about the thoughts. If I'm skipping over any plays that you guys want to talk through, bring them up and we can take a look at them. Like on the Tampa side, I do think a guy like Devin Tompkins could potentially get involved. Did see 3 looks last time out. There's not a ton of reason to have like a lot of faith that there's going to be a lot of volume. Only 26% of the snaps, a 6.3 yard A-dot, 5 yards per catch. He's cheap, 3,000, 4,600. But especially with these down the depth chart guys, once we start digging in down depth chart, I'd rather at least get like, the 4th receiver playing with Patrick Mahomes than the 4th receiver. Now I'm asking for the 4th receiver to get on the field, get enough looks, and also be able to catch a touchdown from Baker Mayfield. So you were just compounding the the less than likely things there that we're asking for when we make a play like that. So I don't really love that. Vic David, what's your take on tight end this week? Just the overall tight end position? We can go over to the website and check that out real quick. We do have all of the positions ranked out for fantasy point scoring and value. So if we can pull up the pass catcher board, we've obviously got a pretty big banana in Travis Kelce for Kansas City. Kind of the number one option on the board. Pretty obvious answer, though. He ranks first on FanDuel for both points and point per dollar. First and second on the DK, respectively. Darren Waller in that Giants offense. If we're projecting a decent game for Daniel Jones against that Arizona defense, got to kind of ride with Darren Waller here because their wide receivers flat out suck. So I do expect a pretty decent game from Darren Waller. Ranked third on the FanDuel board, second by points per dollar. Third on DK, ninth by DK points per dollar. Who's interesting? Dalton Kincaid from Buffalo, ranking 6th on the DK point per dollar. 13th by overall fantasy points. 14th on the FanDuel board and 13th by FanDuel point per dollar. But 6th on the point per dollar on DK at only 3,300. Big draft pick for them. Saw a ton of volume, ton of action. They were playing a lot of 2 tight end sets with Kincaid and Knox. I think that's an interesting spot. Talented kid. Sam Laporta's not uninteresting. Doesn't rank out quite as well. You got stupid options like Noah Fant. Who knows what's going to happen with the tight end position out there, though. Obviously, for me, and I think an easy way to look at it is you can just tie your tight end to your high-end quarterbacks. So Kelce, Andrews. Now these aren't even high-end quarterbacks with some of these guys, though. It's gonna say, all right, so maybe the better way to look at it is tight end. You can just, if you're not tying it directly to your quarterback, you can just kind of either try and save money, go to the top of the board, or go to the value play, which is very, very straightforward way of looking at this. But there's a lot of guys that just get kind of lost in the wash at tight end each week. There's a lot of guys that I don't think you need to go out of your way for. So I'm either looking for star caliber talent or I'm looking for a value price at tight end. What I don't want at tight end is like a lot of the middle unless they're directly tied with the quarterback that I'm using in that lineup. Hopefully that makes some sense. Denver tight end as a one-off, eh? It's an interesting spot. I like the Denver passing game with Jerry Jeudy coming back. I think that's kind of interesting if you want to look at it that way. I don't know on the tight end side of things. Doesn't rank out great. We'll get there. I kind of like Jeudy. Just a talented guy. Used him a pretty decent amount last year. So that's probably where I end up looking in that Denver passing game. I think we talked about this one up and down pretty much. Right? We talked about the backs. We talked about the pass catchers. Let's keep on going. Third game up. Green Bay and Atlanta, 40.5 point total. Another one that's not a outrageous total. Some talent on both sides of this one. A little bit limited at the quarterback spot. Jordan Love did have a good game last week, but let's see it again. Going up against this week, the 10th projected defense by DVOA in Atlanta. Kind of an underrated defense in Atlanta. 16th ranked defense by DVOA projected for Green Bay on their side of things. There could be some opportunities here. We've got some obvious talent, but the Atlanta side is just kind of limited by the way that they approach the game. They're limited by the talent at quarterback. You've got the two-headed monster in the backfield now, given the volume that they gave to Tyler Algier, which kind of proved some of our fears about the Bijan Robinson play and the Bijan Robinson average draft pick ADP. Kind of true, but he also still had a really good game. So it's just kind of, it's a little bit messy on the Atlanta side. I think the Green Bay side is also a little bit messy given that we don't have the status on Aaron Jones. Seems like he's probably not going. Currently, we still have him projected in. If he doesn't play, that gives an obvious uptick to A.J. Dillon. If we don't get Christian Watson, that gives an obvious uptick to the other receivers there. What's the latest on Watson? I meant to look him up before we started. Still questionable. As of... when was that news? That's yesterday. No update. So right now I've got those guys in, and it makes it a little bit murkier on the Green Bay side of things. I think if you lose these two players, it becomes a little bit more straightforward, and then each of the receivers moves up the depth chart a little bit. Luke Musgrave will see a little bit of action. A.J. Dillon will see some action. Doubs and Reed should see a little bit of featured action. But if these guys go, then I kind of just want to, ride with some Christian Watson and Love stacks, maybe some Doubs in there. And then this becomes a more split situation where I prefer Aaron Jones, but we've seen A.J. Dillon chew into that total from time to time. So it's not an ideal DFS game, but I do think you can play both sides of this one. And I do think it makes sense. It also sets up fairly well for the stack configuration, where you've got decent skill players on each side. So you can use a Drake London in a run back. You could certainly use a Bijan in a run back. Kyle Pitts as a run back at the tight end spot is not bad. So there's some options here. Going through them individually. On the quarterback side, Love 245 yards and 3 touchdowns. Monster game. Might end up being his best passing game of the year in terms of the touchdowns. We'll see. Did have 4 looks. Well, one big one, over 50 in terms of the pass attempts. 4 over 30, though. Some deep looks. 10.2 intended air yards per attempt. Throwing the ball downfield a decent amount. Only resulted in 4 air yards per attempt completed. 9.1 yards overall per attempt, though. Decent amount of passing for 5,500, 7,200. The idea that they're going to be slinging the ball around again, but going up against a better defense this time out doesn't really fill us with enthusiasm. And then a little bit in terms of the murky receiving situation. Excuse me. Let me get to the notes for this one. %33% pressure for Atlanta last week with a 19% blitz rate. Is that right? Yeah. 31% blitz rate on the Green Bay side of things, 25% pressure. So there'll be a little bit of pressure on both of these quarterbacks. I think you're really only riding with Jordan Love if you're looking for a quarterback in this one. Last week, Ritter, 115 yards, did throw a touchdown. Pretty limited overall, though. 3.5 intended air yards per pass attempt, 4.2 air yards per attempt. The passing touchdown was to Bijan, if I'm not mistaken, who was involved pretty much across the board. 6 targets. Caught all 6 of them, got in the end zone, saw 2 red zone targets. 10 carries for 56 yards. 3 yards before contact and another 2.6 after. But he had Algiers, 3.9 yards after contact. 15 carries for 75 yards. Outpaced him on the ground. Got in the end zone twice. 3 targets for Algiers. 3 catches. Didn't see any red zone looks. Didn't get in the end zone and through the air. But got the ball into the end zone, got a pretty decent amount of volume on 56% snap share versus 63 for Bijan. Looks like a two-headed situation to me, which kind of sucks. Both these guys have talent. It would be nice to have one of them be a little bit more clear-cut. Bijan obviously looked outrageously good, but kind of limiting in terms of what you can do with these guys, especially with Robinson priced at $79.81. It's not like you're getting much of a discount for the idea that Algier might chew into that volume again. The Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon situation is basically, I prefer Jones if they're both going, even at price 66, 76, not too bad in terms of price, even with Dillon there potentially poaching him. But, I mean, you can see Jones came out of the game about halfway through, 47% of the snaps, 48% of the snaps for Dillon. It's a limiting situation if they both play, but not truly. Jones is the more favored guy. He gets more of the looks in the passing game. 4 targets last week, 3 targets last week for Dillon. Jones got in the end zone through the air, so it was one target in the red zone. If he doesn't go, I do think there's a little bit of room for A.J. Dillon, though. 5,900, 7,000, you get a nice little discount, and he just basically fills in the full-time role and picks up all the volume that Aaron Jones would have. A little bit useful in the passing game as well. But he's disappointed in that spot in seasons past. Last week, carried the ball 13 times for 19 yards, 1.5 yard per attempt, only 0.3 yards before contact, 1.2 yards after contact, didn't break any tackles, 7 yard long. So, is it that really, even if he gets the volume, is that somebody we want to prioritize? Not necessarily. On the passing game side of things, Drake London saw 1 target. That's just bonkers. 6 yards, 6-yard average depth, didn't catch it. 3 targets for Kyle Pitts, 4 for Matt Collins, because why not use Matt Collins more than everybody else? It's just limited in terms of what Ritter's going to be able to do. It's limited in the way that they spread it around last week. Obviously, we've got to expect a lot more looks for Drake London. Very talented receiver. But it wasn't pretty. Last year, London saw 6.9 targets a game with a 10.4 yard ADOT, 4 touchdowns, gave us 7.4 yards per target, 866 total yards. Obviously, a very good receiver. But just limited by the quarterback, limited by the situation. Pitts last year, 13.8 yard ADOT. Got in the end zone twice, 4.5 yards after the catch, 6.03 yards per target. Obviously a talented, valuable tight end. But if they're not getting their number called, if they're not getting a ton of opportunities, if the quarterback's not throwing the ball very well, it becomes very, very limiting around them. That said, they are cheap. They're cheap for their talents. So I think you can buy into the idea that, hey, I'm getting talent for a discount with this offense, and I just hope that I land on it on the right week. If you keep going back to it week after week, and you're on it the weeks that it does come through for a couple touchdowns, then you're probably going to get out ahead of the game. Green Bay side of things, Watson didn't go last week. Seems pretty questionable to play this week. If he does go, he's your WR1 on that team. 4.6 targets a game last year. 7 touchdowns, 13.8 yard ADOT. Daub saw a 9.4 yard ADOT, got in the end zone 3 times, 6.34 yards per target, where Watson was giving you 9.26 yards per target. Daubs did see a couple more targets a game, 5.2 to 4.6. Less of a 1-1A situation than, I think, true 1, true 2, assuming that Watson plays. Daubs with Watson off the field last week, 48% target share. 48% of the snaps, 18.5% target share. Saw the same amount of targets as Jaden Reed, the rookie, who I was thinking that we could potentially get something out of in that situation. 18.6 yard ADOT. Not completely uninteresting. 30-yard opportunity. They're going up against a defense that allowed 3.2 yards per pass attempt and 127 yards and a touchdown, though. Again, Atlanta's pass defense, pretty good. They were getting some decent amount of pressure. So I don't love the options for Green Bay. I like Watson the best, so if he doesn't play, it becomes a little bit more limited. But these two guys are on the board. And then Musgrave, 4 targets at the tight end position. Cheap for $3,200. $5,000 on FanDuel is a little bit more up there. $3,200 is a pretty good price on the DK board. So 14.8% of the targets with an 18-yard ADOT. Pretty decent there. Had a 30-yard look. No red zone targets. Only 3 targets in the red zone. They went to Daubs and then Dontavian Wicks. Wicks saw only 2 targets the entire game. Played 62% of the snaps, though. So if you get the situation where Christian Watson doesn't go, could be a sneaky third wide receiver in that offense. You also saw looks go Samori Touré way. Even Malik Heath got 1. So it's all just a matter of what happens with Watson. If he doesn't play, he goes up, and then to a degree, these guys go up. You still want very limited shares, I think, of these guys. The Wicks, Tourés, and Heaths of the world. Musgrave would be interesting. Good amount of looks at the tight end position for a kid that they believe in. all hinges on this injury spot. Vic David says Jones, Barkley, and Waller look good as a stack. I don't dislike that, particularly given how Jones projects out in my model. Never makes me comfortable rostering my Giants. Never makes me comfortable with Daniel Jones at the quarterback position, but he's obviously had his games for DFS. So have both of the guys he's playing that you mentioned in that stack. And yeah, I think those are the top two options in that offense for sure. What's up, Obi-Wan? Obi-Wan says, hey, Tara, NFL season. What's good, fellas? It's good, buddy. How you doing? Saturday show, hit the like, the subscribe, all those fun things. Keep us rolling. 6:56. We started at 6 o'clock. We are 3 games deep. That puts us on pace for another 4-hour show. We will pick up the pace a little bit as we get into some of these. So this one, I think, again, it all really hinges on whether or not Watson goes on the Packers side of things. And then on the Atlanta side, it's just basically straightforward. Drake London is your obvious top wide receiver, and Kyle Pitts is your obvious second target there. And then you're just mixing and matching some Mac Hollins shares maybe. And I don't really want anybody else in that offense for DFS purposes. Or in the passing game anyway. 4th game up. Indy Houston. Doesn't really project all that interestingly. Just based on some of the pace factors, I do think there's a little bit of potential for this one to run a little bit more than expected. These teams run a lot of plays, but they're 2 really low-end options. Rookie QBs. Showdown of the rookie QBs will be fun. 24th ranked defense DVOA projected for Houston. 21st ranked defensive DVOA projected for Indy. Some opportunities here for the young kids to sling the ball around a little bit. They've both got interesting enough targets to work with. I'll give them that much. They don't project completely terribly. They don't project great. They don't project up in the 20s like some of the premium quarterbacks on the board. But they don't project completely poorly. Stroud's got Nico to throw to a lesser extent some Dalton Schultz. Richardson's got Pittman to throw to a lesser extent some Alec Pierce. Some Kylan Granson at the tight end position. It's not great. A little bit murky in the running game on both sides. If we're looking at this one, I think it is, again, another one where we want to look a little bit primarily toward the passing situations. For DFS purposes, I don't know how lost we want to get in the options in this game. It's another spot where, on the Houston side, Dameon Pierce, Devin Singletary, Mike Boone. 45%, 21%, 31% of the snaps. Pierce carried the ball 11 times for 38 yards and a 3.5 yard per attempt, 1.4 yards after contact, 1.4 yards and 2.1 yards before contact, both led running backs on this team last week. He led in number of attempts. Singletary got the ball 7 times, carried it for 15 yards, 2.1 yards per attempt, 1.4 yards before contact. Just getting hit too early. Going up against the team that allowed 3 yards per carry on the ground last week, 105 yards overall on the ground, though, two rushing touchdowns. Could one of these guys punch the ball into the end zone? Sure. Do I know which one of at least the top 2 guys it's going to be? Not really. And I think their opportunities to do so are going to be kind of overall limited. And then we saw Mike Boone get 4 targets last week, which is just annoying. He caught 3 of them. Didn't get in the end zone. Didn't get any red zone looks. But he did get some targets out of the backfield. It just kind of makes the situation a little bit murkier. If it was just these 2 guys, I think we could deal with it a little bit better. Not that they'd be priorities, but at least you'd have had a little bit better idea. But just given the situation here, I just really don't like it. Indy versus Houston. Let's see here. No decent notes on this one. And then on the other side, you get Zach Moss joining the offense. Didn't play last week. Deion Jackson saw 71% of the snaps. Carried the ball 13 times for 14 yards. A 1.1 yard per attempt. 0.9 yards after contact. 0.2 yards before contact. Not exactly fantastic, folks. Going up against the defense that was allowing 3.4 yards per rush attempt, 110 yards and 3 touchdowns rushing last week. That could be helpful if they get that sort of upside, but dicey. 6 targets, 5 catches, no looks in the red zone. And with Zach Moss coming in here and probably cutting into the volume, I just don't love it. Moss last year, $35.1 yards per game on 6.9 touches. 7.2. What is that category? It's rushing attempts. It's 4.9 yards per rush attempt. That's what I was looking for. Only 1 touchdown. So not exactly a superstar joining the backfield either, but just a guy who's going to cut into the volume for an already pretty limited guy. I just don't really like the rushing game on the Indy side of things. If you want to tell me that the quarterback's going to do more of the running, whatever. We don't need that one. How did I get his... They got in the end zone. Do I not have his... Oh, it's probably listed somewhere else. That's right. Yeah, the way the stats boards are done, he's not listed on the rushing stats. He did get in the end zone last week, though. But kind of renowned for his rushing ability. So I do think there's upside for him to potentially get in the end zone. Anthony Richardson. Looking at the two quarterbacks, 63-75 for the more talented of the two. But you did have a ton of volume for C.J. Stroud. 44 passing attempts. 242 yards, no touchdowns on that. 5.9 intended air yards per attempt versus 5.8 on the other side. Both the kids slung it around a little bit last week. Had some key drops. 3 red zone looks for Richardson, 1 for Stroud. So he's throwing the ball into the end zone a little bit on the Richardson side in addition to being able to potentially run it in. 37 passing attempts versus 44. Decent opportunity, decent volume. Both teams were, running a fair amount of plays. Where's the notes on the pace that I read? Indy was 5th in neutral pace last week. Houston was 3rd. Not nothing. On the receiving side, Pittman's probably my favorite overall receiver in this game. To me, most proven out guy. 8 catches on 11 looks last week, 97 yards and a TD, 28.2% of the target share. Saw a 30-yard look, 39-yard long. Defense last week was allowing 6 yards per pass attempt, 155 yards, no touchdowns allowed last week through the air. On the other side, 2 touchdowns allowed by Indy. Nico's kind of interesting on the Houston side of things. Did see 11 targets last week, caught 6 of them, 80 yards, didn't get in the end zone, but a 25.6% target share for a guy who's a fairly talented down the field receiver. 14.4 yard ADOT, not uninteresting. 9.8 air yards per catch, 4 over 10 yards, 1 over 20 yards. So considering that he's going to be the prime target in that offense, not so bad. You did have Woods there. He got 10 looks, 22.7% of the volume. Dalton Schultz, the tight end, 81% of the snaps, but only 9.3% targets. Got 4 looks, caught 2 of them, and only a 1.5 yard ADOT. But Schultz is a guy who could get in the end zone. Did see a red zone target, didn't get it in, but saw the red zone target among those guys last week. So I do think there's opportunity for Schultz to score. 4,000, 4,800. It's not a bad tight end option. Not a bad option to pair with your quarterback if you're going to this game. Woods is interesting. I mean, 4,600, 5,800. He's not all that discounted from Nico on the DK slate. A little bit more offset on FanDuel. Was out there for 75% of the snaps and did see volume. 19-yard long. Had a drop. But going up against a team that's going to allow some opportunities through the air. I don't hate the Robert Woods play if you're going to this offense. As a cheap option for some one-offs, not terrible. 2 touchdowns last year, a 5.79 yards per target, 7.8 yard ADOT. Mechie didn't play last week, should be out on the field this week. 3,600, 4,500. Now we're going deep. I'm going back to my ridiculous notes from last week. Yeah, where is he? I don't know. Have been. Oh, well. Could see a couple of looks. Matchy coming back in, but they've got Tank Dell there. Tank saw 4 targets last week, caught 3, 34 yards, 19% target share. Not nothing. 8.5 yards average. 8.5 yard A dot. They only have the one red zone target. So for 3,200, does Mechie cut into Tank Dell's looks and they both get 2 or some kind of limitation like that? I could see that. It could become a situation where it's a coin flip between which one of them can get a target in the right spot, create an opportunity. They're not off the board, but they're down the board. Let's put it that way. On the Indy side, I talked about Pittman, the volume, all the justification in the world for going to him, making him your primary play, along with Anthony Richardson in stacks. But you do have Alec Pierce here. He's 92% of the snaps is the clear number 2. Only 3 targets, 7.7% of the volume. Where Josh Downs saw 7 targets, 17.9% of the volume, 79% of the snaps. Though I'm just going with the guy who's going to be on the field a little bit more. But I think Downs is definitely in play for 3,400, 5,200. There's no denying the volume. Only a 2.9 yard A dot, kind of the closer to the line of scrimmage safety valve rather than the downfield guy. Whereas Alec Pierce saw a 7.3 yard A dot to lead the team outside of guys not named Mo Alley Cox. So I don't mind the Alec Pierce, especially if he's going to be a little bit sneaky. People might go to Josh Downs just on the idea of volume, where 5-6 catches near the line of scrimmage. That's okay, especially in a PPR format. It's okay, but I prefer the downfield guy. I prefer the downfield volume. You get 2 looks in the red zone though for Downs, so that's important. If we're talking about touchdowns, it's obviously a key. Didn't convert either of them, but did get 2 looks in the red zone. But we had 2 looks for Pittman. We also had 1 for Alec Pierce in the red zone. So they're spreading the ball around a little bit. I don't mind any of the 3 receivers. It's a pretty clear 1, 2, 3 though for me. Isaiah McKenzie didn't see any action. Was out there for 1% of the snaps. That's not the volume we're looking for. Kyle Granson, 61% of the snaps, saw 6 looks, 4 catches for 39 yards. What do you have on the A dot? 6.5 yard A dot, 9.8 yards per catch. Decent amount of tight end volume for a guy who's priced 3,000, 4,700. Not a bad option at tight end. I could be intrigued by if he sees a similar amount of volume. Going to need him to get looks in the red zone for sure. Obviously got to convert on one of them. But given that they were looking his way a few times, it's not a bad option. Miss anything here? Granson doesn't project out great. He does have Mo Alley there. Cox was out there 42% of the snaps. Only saw 2 targets, 5% of the volume. Did have the 19.5 yard A dot. I think Granson's your clear tight end in that offense if you're going to it for DFS purposes. Good for the money. Not a priority by any means. Probably going to have to nudge him a little bit if you're building with these projections. Schultz doesn't need a nudge. Schultz should come up. 4,000, 4,800 projected like that, he should come up. Those are the kinds of things that I got to get into a little bit more with the groups in the stacks article like we were doing in years past. Hey, finally a fun game. Highest total on the board, 51.5 point total. By the way, if you're noticing the fix me, that's just my error message in for the DK projections. It's the same projection for defense, so it doesn't really matter. But I just have that in there so I can spot errors quickly. And I forgot to fix it before I transcribe these over. Some of them have projections, it looks like. Some of them not. So I'm not sure why that would be, but whatever. Oh, maybe it's just because Jacksonville is Jack's not Jack. Let's go back over to chat, see what's going on. Audio scratchy? Did that just start? Let me know, guys. Is it still doing it now as I'm talking now, or is it just for a minute there? I might have just had my hand on like the wire or something. Let me know in chat how it sounds, whether it's coming through or not. A handful of people hanging out still. Just got better? All right, I think I have my foot on the wire or something. I think I was touching something by accident. My fault. Better now. All right, cool. Appreciate that, guys. Yeah, always shout that out. So potential for a shootout here for sure. KC only favored by 3.5 against Jacksonville. Jacksonville, a much improved team. I think Trevor Lawrence is going to be interesting all year, especially with Calvin Ridley to throw to. Christian Kirk is a decent weapon. Zay Jones even isn't bad. He's got a good tight end in Evan Engram, a good receiving running back, and a good running back overall, I think, in Travis Etienne. They're an interesting team this year. They've got some weapons. Pat Mahomes, a little bit more limited in what he's got to work with than in some years. Sky Moore, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Kadarius Dropsy Tony. A lot of question marks around that receiving core, but he should get Travis Kelce back, which is obviously the key for Pat Mahomes. And how did it fix when I went to check chat? I don't know. Maybe that was the key. I was on multiple different windows, so maybe that's what it was too. While I had like Microsoft Word open, I was reading I was looking at my Microsoft Word doc from last week for a note on John Mechie, but I didn't have it. I thought I did. At this point, I have stuff spread out all over creation for this for these football breakdowns. Hopefully, you guys are getting something out of it. Let me know if you want me to change things up, how things go. Obviously, a little bit more limited crowd, but this will sit here at least through tomorrow, and some people can catch it when they need to. I know it's Saturday night. Appreciate everybody coming and hanging out. 7-12, we're a handful of games in. Little ways to go, but one of the more interesting ones, obviously, on the board to talk about now. Kind of a fun one. I think we can go to both of these teams pretty aggressively. If the Jacksonville side isn't as owned as it should be, I think that would be an intriguing spot. I imagine it's going to get pretty popular, though. 6,700, 7,800. Lawrence priced a little bit low for a guy who threw the ball 32 times last week. 241 yards, 2 TDs. 6.9 intended air yards per pass attempt. Obviously pales in comparison with the 9.1 intended air yards per pass attempt for Pat Mahomes on the other side. A lot more deep looks for Mahomes. 1 over 30. Had 4 20-yard passes. Lawrence did have 3 20-yard attempts, 8 over 10 yards. So both these teams sling the ball downfield a little bit at least. They both have pretty good downfield targets. They both have pretty reliable skill players on both sides. Or maybe not so much for Mr. Mahomes, given that he had 5 drops from his wide receiver core. That's not helping anything. That was 3 for the guy who got the category named after him. If you look up here, they're Tony's. Those are our drops. 3 drops for Tony last week, and a drop for, who's that, MVS? Rashee Rice, who we were on a little bit. I do think he's a talented kid. He got in the end zone. Sorry for bouncing back and forth. I just wanted to look at the drops there. So on the KC side of things, we've got Kelce. The big one. Didn't play last week. No stats accrued from that, obviously. But if we want to look at last year, 8.9 yards, 9 targets a game, 12 touchdowns, 1,300 yards, 7.1 yard ADOT, 8.8 yards per target. I don't think I have to sell anybody Travis Kelce at the tight end position. If he's out there, I assume he's full go. I don't worry about injury considerations, limitations, or anything like that. Just full bore Travis Kelce play. And he's obviously their primary weapon and the number one option to stack with Patrick Mahomes. Power says you sounded like Max Headroom. Trey says, I moved date night to tomorrow afternoon so I can get research in. That's commitment, man. I love it. Commitment. Although if does your significant other appreciate like watching football as the activity to be done during date afternoon? Or are you going to have to skip watching these games and just constantly be on your phone through the date? Jazz Chisholm with a grand slam. Hopefully somebody out there rostered the Marlins. I don't even remember what the baseball board looked like today. We do have baseball up on the site. Going to continue doing it every day, but we skipped the show today. Just yes, not a lot to talk about with baseball today. There is a lot to talk about here, though, so let's keep on going. Sky Moore last week, 3 targets, 0 catches, kind of concerning. 8.1% target share. Did have a 9.3 yard ADOT. MVS, obviously their super downfield target with a 23 yard ADOT. He only saw 2 targets. Caught both of them for 48 yards. 23-yard A dot should not be ignored. I definitely think we could see a couple downfield looks. 4,500, 5,700. I mean, you got to expect a little bit more overall volume for MVS just on talent alone in this offense as a wide receiver. He saw 63% of the snaps in there with Sky Moore at 69%, but they did spread a lot of snaps around. A lot of these guys got on the field. Obviously, 88% for Noah Gray, 40% for Blake Bell. Those are both going to go down with Kelsey coming back. But 29% of the snaps for Justin Watson. He saw a 25.5-yard A dot, 10% of the targets. 35% of the snaps for Richie James Jr. 31% for Rashee Rice, the guy we were on. 5 targets, 3 catches. Got in the end zone, only 29 yards, but he got in the end zone for us. 7.6-yard A dot. They're going to spread the ball around again. Kind of a crapshoot with these guys. So I think you can play the price and the ownership game with the wide receivers here. My favorite play is probably just to book the Kelsey shares, and then if I'm going Mahomes +2, probably just book a lot of MVS into those spots and look for the home run play, the deep touchdown pass, to go along with the Kelsey just volume, probable touchdown, and Mahomes' obvious upside. But I do think if you're building out a bunch of stacks, you can spread out some of those shares. Kadarius Toney, probably my least favorite option in this passing game. Not just because of the drops, but because of a lot of his good numbers last year were more based on efficiency rather than an actual talent. I've seen enough of Kadarius Toney to, I know he's got explosive upside on the right day, but 25% of the snaps last week, had the 3 drops on 5 targets, only caught one of them, 1 yard. Not great. 8.2-yard A dot is okay. I don't love the option, and I think they could be in the doghouse a little bit as well. So you've got that factor, and when you've got guys like Rashee Rice, Richie James to throw to, Justin Watson, who was getting looks again for deep targets last week, when you've got other options, I think it's easy enough to just kind of put Kadarius Toney in the doghouse. He sees, instead of 25%, which is already limited, he sees 10, 12% of the snaps, only 1, 2 targets. That becomes a really, really limited option for DFS really, really quickly. On the ground in this one, we had Pacheco last week, saw 48% of the snaps. McKinnon saw 31%, and CEH saw 22%. I believe CEH is questionable for this one, so probably a little bit more on the ground for Pacheco, and then McKinnon to be the primary target. Although Pacheco out-targeted him last week, 4-2. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, McKinnon ran more routes. Got to get the routes run numbers in here. Either way, I don't think we fall in love with Kansas City on the ground. Just not really where you want to get involved with this offense, given how prolific they are in the passing game, even with some of the question marks at wide receiver. You're talking about 8 carries and 6 carries last week between Pacheco and CEH. 45 yards total. Pacheco 1.6 before contact, 1.3 after contact per attempt. Limited options. No looks in the red zone for any of the running backs. I think there's definitely more talent on the ground on the other side in this one. Travis Etienne, 6,900, 8,200 across sites. Definitely a guy that you can use as a run back play running back, whether you put him in the running back spot or in the flex spot. Definitely an interesting option. So 80% of the snaps last week, 18 carries, 77 yards, 1.8 yards before contact, and a solid yards after contact per attempt, 2.4 yards after contact per attempt, 5 broken tackles last week, had a 20-yard play with a 26-yard long, saw 5 targets, caught all 5 of them. It's an interesting option. I like Travis Etienne. I think he's a good player. Tank Bigsby saw a lot less volume, 21% of the snaps, only 7 carries, 13 yards. Did get in the end zone. You got to worry about that a little bit, I think, with poaching some touchdowns here. Doesn't necessarily make him overly interesting for DFS purposes. 53 feels a little high, 47. I'd rather have him at like D'Ernest Johnson pricing if I could, but I can't. The volume makes it a little bit limiting for Tank, but he might get the ball in the end zone. That's the concern. Take away a touchdown from, or at least an attempt in the red zone from Travis Etienne. That becomes a little bit of the concern there. But I like Etienne a lot. I like him in stacks. If we're looking at the passing game on the Jacksonville side, which I do want to get to, definitely think that, like I said, Trevor Lawrence, given the price discrepancy here, is a pretty interesting option. Threw the ball a decent amount last week. 6.9 yard intended air yard per attempt. and going up against a defense that was allowing 6.9 yards per pass attempt, 250 yards, and a touchdown with a 6.8 yard defensive ADOT, not gaining a lot of pressure, only had 1 sack last week. I like the opportunity for Trevor Lawrence. He's got Calvin Ridley to work with, which is great for him. 11 targets last week for Ridley, turned it into a touchdown and 101 yards on 8 catches. That was 34% of the targets. Zay Jones was second with 21.9%. And then Engram at tight end, 15.6%. 7 targets, 5 targets respectively. Christian Kirk, the number 3 by snap count, 60% of the snaps, only 3 targets, only caught 1 of them. 6.7 yard ADOT. A little bit more limited than I was expecting for Christian Kirk last week. I actually liked Kirk going into last week. 6,000. I do think he's playable, but given that you get Zay Jones for a little bit cheaper, well, a little bit cheaper on DK anyway, you get certainly Evan Engram getting a lot of action at the tight end position. You don't want to spread it out too much, but I do think that Kirk can get involved. 6,000. It's not like he's expensive. He's just more expensive than guys who got more looks in this offense last week. Back to last year, Kirk was getting 7.8 yards or 7.8 targets a game, had over 1,100 yards, had 8 touchdowns, a 9.1 yard ADOT, 8.3 yards per target. So there's clearly talent there. So I wouldn't go away from Christian Kirk all that much just on the volume from last week. If it makes it uncomfortable for the field, if the field starts going more to Zay Jones, I think that creates a little bit of an opportunity around Christian Kirk. We just have to hope that the volume actually ticks up, that the snap share or the targets per route run tick up a little bit. Mama says, let's win and max out the Millie. Love it. Let's go Phils. Trey played the Phillies 4-3, so he feels better now. Nice. Oh, Trey answered back. Won't be able to watch the games. That's his trade-off. All right. It's a good trade-off. You get to build your lineups. You get your research in. That's the fun part anyway. A lot of these weeks, I throw on Red Zone, and I'm just sitting there like, just kind of a haze between the smoking and the just hitting the wall at the end of the busy fantasy day, the weekend of coverage, and all of that stuff. It is just a nice, relaxing Sunday. But, yeah, a lot of the time I'm watching, but I don't necessarily absorb what happens in a lot of the games. I'm checked out mentally on Sunday afternoons a lot. So you're just doing it a different way. Same trade-off. If we're looking at Engram at the tight end position, a 5.2 yard ADOT, but we know he can get down the field a little bit. Did gain 9.8 yards per catch last time out. 5 catches for 49 yards. A productive tight end. A kid who can definitely go get the ball. So I don't mind the option for Engram. The Jamal Agnews of the world, I think, no. 4% of the snaps last week, saw no targets, and then obviously not much to work with through the middle there. Definitely more depth on the KC side, but more in a concerning way where like these options could just confuse things. Like the Watson option for sure. Only 10.8% of the targets and 29% of the snaps, but saw a pretty significantly deep target. Could happen again. Justin Ross got on the field for 1 target, made 1 catch. We were talking about him as potentially like a sneaky red zone option going into that week 1 showdown slate. If he got a look, maybe he got it in near the end zone, and he's a big kid. That's not what happened. He caught his 1 pass, but if he gets on the field for 15% of the snaps, let's say Kadarius Toney is in the doghouse, his snaps go up. Maybe he gets 3 looks instead of 1. Maybe one of them's in the red zone. These are the things that compile in the KC offense that get a little bit annoying when it comes to those wideouts. That's kind of why I just want to focus like Travis Kelce and then some MVS for the downfield shots. Maybe mix and match some of the other guys, but I think primary, secondary for me. Not that Sky Moore is untalented, don't get me wrong. Last year in that passing game, Sky Moore saw just 2.1 targets. MVS had 4.8 targets a game. McKinnon gets targets out of the backfield. It's just a big spread. But Mahomes is going to find his score somewhere. So you do have to have those, the support structure in there for Mahomes to have his big game. '29th ranked D by projected DVOA for Kansas City, 26th for Jacksonville First ranked offense for Kansas City, 8th ranked for Jacksonville. Shootout potential. Should be a popular game for DFS purposes. About halfway through. 45-point total. Interesting one here. I mentioned really liking the LA side of this one. I think Herbert's a really interesting quarterback in this one against a pretty pass-heavy, pass funnel type D. 22nd projected DVOA defensively for Tennessee. 15th for Los Angeles, and the 5th ranked offense, where Tennessee has the 24th ranked offense. I think we're certainly... Damn it, I have my hands on that wire again. I gotta keep my hands to myself. I think we definitely need to favor the LA side of this one, but we do need Tennessee to keep up with LA, to keep their keep the game a little bit close, which Vegas does like. 2.5 point spread. Obviously not a major spread with a pretty healthy total here. So Vegas does like them to stay in the game despite not being the best team in the world. Derrick Henry, I think, is going to have to do his part. He projects out as the highest end player on the club. He was definitely sharing some of his touches last week with Tajay Spears, though. So we'll see how that goes this week. A little bit of question around the volume for Derrick Henry after him being just, a vacuum for volume over the past few years. Tannehill, kind of a limited quarterback. DeAndre Hopkins is banged up going into this one, but obviously he's DeAndre Hopkins. If he's out there, we consider him full go. Treylon's okay. Chigakonkwo. It gets pretty limited pretty quickly. Nick Westbrook-Ikini on the Tennessee side of things. Greatly prefer the Los Angeles side, where we get Mike Williams, we get Keenan Allen, we get Quentin Johnston, who is a presumably talented kid who projects out fairly well for a cheap price. Gerald Everett, a pretty talented tight end. We get Josh Palmer, who got too many looks last week, but he's cheap and he projects out okay. I think there's a lot of different directions to go with this LA offense. As we get into the specifics. Whoops. Herbert last week, 23 of 33, 229 yards and a touchdown. Opportunity to improve on that. 7.1 intended air yards per attempt. 8 balls over 10 yards, 3 over 20, 2 over 30. Pretty decent downfield numbers. Had 5 opportunities in the red zone. Tannehill had 6 opportunities in the red zone. Had 3 overall drops, which didn't help his overall game. 9.1 intended air yards per attempt, so he's throwing the ball downfield a little bit. Had a look over 40 yards, handful over 20, 30, 9 looks over 10 yards. So in terms of downfield action, there's certainly the opportunity here. Tannehill threw the ball 34 times. He only completed 47% of them, 198 yards, and didn't throw a TD. I don't know how much that leads me into Tannehill, but maybe it supports the idea of Tennessee being able to stay in this game and be a viable run back position. If you're running back shares of Derrick Henry, if you're running back shares of D-Hop, I think you're doing okay. Obviously, between the quarterbacks, Justin Herbert's the one you want. 77,000, 8,200. He's even a little bit cheap. Where does he rank out on the quarterbacks board? Herbert ranks 3rd by FanDuel points, 4th by points per dollar. On DK, he ranks 2nd by points and 1st by points per dollar. Pretty significant opportunity there. Pretty cheap on DK at 7,000. That's a good spot. I really like the receivers he's got to work with. It's not these guys, though. It's these guys. Keenan Allen, primed for a big day. Just a good receiver. I know he's up there in age at this point. He's, 31, 32? But still really, really good. Still saw a big chunk of the volume, 29% of the target share. Had 9 targets, caught 6 of them. 76 yards, didn't get in the end zone, but had an 11.7 yard ADOT. Gave us 12.7 yards per catch. Had a look over 30 yards, 36 yard long. 1 target in the red zone. Mike Williams also had a target in the red zone. Williams, 5 targets overall, 16%. 4 catches for 45. An 8.4 yard ADOT. Was working a little bit more in the interior, but that's still pretty decent. 11.3 yards per catch. Quentin Johnston, only 3 targets. Only 27% of the snaps. I would hope that the volume goes up a little bit. We saw a lot more Josh Palmer, 64% of the snaps. Only saw 1 target, only caught 1 pass, but he was out there quite a bit. I'd like to see a little bit more of Quentin Johnston, who I do think is a potentially talented kid. By all accounts, talented kid. But going up against a defense that was allowing 7.6 yards per pass attempt, gave up 282 yards through the air and a touchdown, definitely some opportunity there. And then the Chargers defense last week, by the way, 466 yards through the air, 10.4 yards per pass attempt, and 3 touchdowns. That's obviously atrocious. They're not projected to be that bad. 15th overall combined, obviously passing and rushing. But 15th overall defense, but that pass defense was atrocious last week. I just don't know that Tannehill's the guy to take advantage of it. A lot of it probably comes down to whether D-Hop is out there with him. If you get Hopkins, last week he saw 13 targets, caught 7 of them, 65 yards, didn't get in the end zone, and a bit of a disappointment, but obviously a volume monster with nearly 40% of the target share. And then Westbrook-Ikhine had 21.2%, while Treylon Burks fell in, kind of in between the cracks with only 9%, 3 targets, 2 catches for 18 yards. Kind of limited there. He's, to me, clearly their second receiver, their second best option, but was a little bit more limited there than you would expect. Would obviously go up in opportunities if Hopkins is out. I think Treylon becomes the number 1. Westbrook slides up. That's fairly straightforward. Chris Moore saw 1 target. I guess he would presumably be the next man up. 14% of the snaps. Chig's not pulling because he's... Chigosium. At some point I'll build a naming table in here. In future weeks, by the way, this is going to be these player by player. These are season stats. It's not always going to be like just, last week this is what they did, because obviously last week isn't predictive. And that's something that's key about fantasy football, DFS, football in general, especially by comparison to any other sport. It's so limited in these sample sizes that a lot of data in football, outside of just the specifics around this guy saw this many opportunities and he was out there this much of the time, it's very limited in what a lot of the data even means. A lot of the predictive stuff, a lot of the stuff that could potentially be predictive, is very questionable in terms of sample size. So that's always something worth bearing in mind when we talk about numbers for NFL. But the overarching point there was that this is going to be stretched out, to season numbers as the season goes along. We're just looking at a season of 1 week so far. Where were we? We are talking about this game. On the ground, only Josh Kelly populating in terms of having a projection on the Chargers side of things. 5,000, 6,300. Saw 48% of the snaps last week. 91 yards on 16 attempts. 4 yards before contact, 1.7 yards after contact. Should see a uptick in opportunity here. What's the... who the hell else is in this backfield with Eckler out? Spiller, I guess? Let me make a note to make sure that Spiller gets a projection. It is Spiller, right? The next man in? Because, not to bury the lead, but Eckler's out. Not traveling with the team. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion. I think Kelly's the focus. Got in the end zone last week. 91 yards, obviously pretty decent. 5.7 yards per attempt. Broke 3 tackles. I don't know if I'm really looking to this team for their ground game, though, this week. Especially if that spot gets popular at all. 5,000, 6,300. Not even like super discounted. Given the idea that he'll see an uptick in volume, certainly. It's a relatively cheap price. Comparative to Derrick Henry on the other side, obviously it's a pretty cheap price. But if that spot gets popular, I don't know how much I love it. I kind of want to lean on the passing game for the Chargers. Derrick Henry obviously is a play any given slate. 48% of the snaps last week to Spears' 54%. 15 carries for 63 yards. Not exactly Derrick Henry type numbers. Only 3 carries for Spears. Spears saw more of the targets. 4 targets to 3. Saw the red zone target. We did get a little bit of unexpected target volume for Derrick Henry last year. But if that's going to go away, it takes him back down to a obviously extremely talented, extreme upside, high ceiling volume-based running back. but he does, kind of go back to becoming that, to being that. It is definitely the opportunity, though, on the ground in this game. I think you just go to Derrick Henry, and like I said, he does make a sensible run back play against the pass offense for the Chargers. Yeah, try to hit on the big pass defense, big pass funnel for Tennessee's D, and that's what's going to create the opportunity. I just think there's a tremendous spot. Boy, I wonder we'll have Kellen throw. I think you meant that the other way around, right? So yeah, it's basically Derrick Henry here. I don't think there's going to be enough on the ground game for Spears to support any kind of realistic kind of a play. 4,600, 4,700. He's obviously very, very cheap as a dart throw. Probably touchdown dependent as a dart. Maybe he gets some looks in the red zone again in the passing game. Maybe he gets the ball in the end zone, but feels pretty thin, despite taking some volume away from Derrick Henry. On the Tennessee side in the passing game, we talked about Hopkins and his 13 targets, his 39, nearly 40% pass share. We talked about Treylon. We went through this. Westbrook-Ikini, 14.5 yards per catch, but only a 5-yard A-dot last week. Did see 21.2% of the volume, 7 targets, only caught 4 of them. 2 red zone looks, though. That's somewhat significant in a limited offense. Just want to get to the guys who's going to get some opportunities around the red zone. If Hopkins goes out, does that go up? Could be a little bit interesting. What's the latest on Hopkins? Questionable. Didn't practice all week. Yada, yada, yada. Yeah, about where he was. So if no D-Hop, then we get a little bit of an uptick for Chig, who is still not populating on this board, annoyingly. I don't know why. Did have a 17-yard A-dot. Why is he not coming up? That's annoying. Let's see if I can steal somebody else's notes. Two targets. No catches last week. That is last week, right? Yeah. So 2 targets, no catches, but did have a 17-yard average depth of target, which is obviously pretty good. And Chargers allowed quite a bit of scoring to the tight end position last year, apparently. So that's an interesting-ish spot, but really more so if Hopkins goes out. I'm primarily interested in the wide receivers if I'm going to the Tennessee side, but really I'm looking at this offense for more run-back plays to support Chargers stacks, which leads me more toward Hopkins and then more toward Derrick Henry. Kind of limited potential for for Tennessee as a stack. Talked about all these guys up and down. Talked about those guys. Did we go through the receivers outside of Keenan Allen? Williams, 5 looks, 16% of the targets, 8.4-yard A-dot. 12-yard A-dot for Quentin Johnston does support the idea of him being an interesting downfield option, an interesting dynamic, explosive play potential kid. Just needs to be out there for more of the looks, like I was saying. Palmer, just got to get Palmer out of the way. Gerald Everett was out there 68% of the snaps, saw 3 targets. Only a 2.3-yard A-dot, more safety valve-ish, but 10.5 yards per catch. Not awful. No looks in the red zone, but can definitely get in the end zone in this passing game. He's a part of my stacks for sure. Top priority, second. Probably third priority. I think you got to prioritize him over Quentin Johnston and certainly over Josh Palmer. Just on the volume. I'd like to get to the spot where we can say Johnston is the third man in for sure, but we need to see more snaps. Pretty good there. Vegas and Buffalo. Buffalo coming in as 9-point favorites. That's never all that comfy. I don't love going to blowout spots. You definitely need Vegas to keep up. Obviously, I shouldn't say it exactly like that, right? I don't want to say I don't love going to blow up spots and just leave that alone, because you get 3-4 scores out of a blowout spot. But if you don't get that support coming back the other way from a team like Vegas, you really fall thin in the second half of the game on the leading team, just kind of taking their foot off the gas pedal a little bit, feeding carries to guys like James Cook. Maybe Cook's score goes up by a little bit, but you don't get those, those 5th and 6th, those crucial scores out of these teams, or those fourth and fifth scores out of these teams. You get more grindy. You get more second half, just wear it down, burn the clock, get some running going, and just chew the rest of the game up. And I don't love the opportunity for Vegas necessarily to provide a lot of support. They do have good skill players in Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfrow, who I like. Josh Jacobs is a volume beast and obviously a very talented running back. I think those three guys are good. Garoppolo manages his way through the game, not make mistakes kind of a quarterback, but not an explosive quarterback. Not a quarterback who's going to go out there and throw for 400 yards and really keep them in the game most of the time. So a little bit limited on the Vegas side, which has a little bit of a limiting impact on the Buffalo side. But I definitely want to get at least some Buffalo, given the fairly high total, one of the higher totals on the board. Obviously, they're big favorites, so we're all expecting at least a little scoring out of this team. Josh Allen, one of the highest projected quarterbacks on both sites. Stephon, his number one target, one of the higher projected wideouts, getting a nice cushion on DK scoring with the PPR. Cook saw a decent amount of volume last week. Interesting running back for only 61, 66 in this offense. And I do think the idea of a potential blowout supports the idea that he would get a little bit involved. In lineups where I don't go to Buffalo, I think Cook is where I don't go to Buffalo as the stack. I think Cook just on his own as a running back play in those lineups is kind of interesting. Like a Chargers Herbert stack, Herbert, Keenan Allen, Hopkins coming back the other way, or Derrick Henry coming back the other way, let's say. James Cook has a cheap running back in there, just building out the combos. I kind of like that opportunity. And if you're not going to the Buffalo stack in that lineup, that kind of feeds that narrative of, all right, maybe the Buffalo stack does score, but they don't score enough to really have the big DFS day, and they start feeding this kid in the second half because they've gone out ahead by 3 scores. Semi-interesting options in Gabe Davis down the board. Not so much in Damian Harris. He projects out okay. Going to take a few carries. Don't really like the option in Harris. I think the tight ends are interesting. Given how much they ran the 2 tight end personnel, the 12-man last week, 12 personnel, and given that Kincaid is a kid that they spent pretty significant draft capital on, second-round pick if I'm not mistaken, 3,300, 5,200, he saw some looks. Think he's very interesting, and Dawson Knox obviously has a lot of faith built up with the quarterback and was out there just as much as Kincaid. So I like both of those tight ends. I wouldn't go out there and build like a Josh Allen, Kincaid at the tight end, Dawson Knox at the flex spot. I think that's really, really pushing it. So I wouldn't do that. But either one of these guys and these guys in like rotation with one another in my Josh Allen stacks, I definitely think is interesting. I think I would prefer, given the nature of the way that this game's probably going to go, to just go with Allen and his pass catchers in my Buffalo stacks, and then let my shares of the Buffalo running game fall where they will in other lineups. This working out okay with the game position, like position by position within game by game? Is that working out for you guys? Taking too much time, not spending enough time? Let me know what you guys think. Yeah, check. I meant have Herbert throw, yeah. Boy wonder is Kellen Moore. Yeah, Power, that is what it is with Chig, that they have Chigozium in there. I jumped into one of those boards and changed it while we were talking there, but it didn't come up. I must have grabbed the wrong board. I've got stats on way too many tabs at this point in 2022 stats, 2023 stats, so I probably just changed it in the wrong spot. When I build a naming table, it'll take care of all of that. Yet another thing to do on the things to do list. So putting some numbers behind things. Allen, 41 attempts last week, only threw for 236 yards, only 1 touchdown. 3.2 air yards per attempt, but 8.2 intended air yards per attempt. So he was trying to throw downfield a little bit more than he completed. 2 looks in the red zone, 5 looks in the red zone last week for Jimmy G. Jimmy, 20-26, 2 touchdowns, 200 yards, 7 intended air yards per attempt. Game manager, managing his way through the game. Didn't completely screw it up for them. Going up against a defense that allowed 4.7 yards per pass attempt, 117 yards and 1 touchdown last week. Generated pressure 42% of the time, which could be significant. Got 3 sacks last week. Only 11.5% blitz, just generating a pretty good amount of pressure with just the the front group there. A lot less pressure for Vegas. A lot less pressure for Josh Allen to be facing. A lot of time to throw the ball. I think Allen's going to have a good opportunity to have a very nice bounce back game. Obviously can run the ball in on his own. So Josh Allen for sure. 7,900 is a fair price on DK. 92, it's a little bit high on FanDuel, but we'll deal with it. Significant upside beyond these passing numbers. Upside to run in 1, throw 2 or 3. Definitely clear path to success with Josh Allen. Just have to have Vegas keep it up. For 53.67, Garoppolo's not off the board if we're chasing the idea of this game going off, both sides of it with Vegas keeping up. I just don't love the option. Just strikes me as way just more of a get us down the field, dink and dunk kind of a passer. So I don't really love it. If I'm going to the Vegas side of things, I kind of want to get invested in some Josh Jacobs. He carried the ball 19 times last week. Only got 48 yards, 2.5 yards per carry, 0.6 yards before contact versus 1.9 yards per attempt after contact. He's just getting hit way too early. There's just no time to create anything if you're getting 0.6 yards before contact. 3 targets, 2 catches, limited in the passing game. Abdullah, not really involved, 12%. You're not really looking for secondary and tertiary running backs in the Vegas rushing game when Jacobs gets so much of the volume. So I think it's just the Jacobs show on the ground for them. And then a little bit more spread out on the Buffalo side. Cook saw 59% of the snaps, 12 carries for 46 yards. Harris, only 1 carry, 3 yards, but did see 2 targets. Cook had 6 targets, 4 catches, 3.2 yards after contact. Pretty solid, only 0.7 yards before contact. So he's getting hit a lot fairly early, but doing a lot with the ball. Interesting running back. A kid that I want to get more involved with if he's if in lineups that don't have Allen. But given the 6 targets in the passing game, that's not nothing. Certainly involved. So you can get him into some Buffalo stacks for sure. But I just prefer him a little bit in the ones that don't include him because you can still catch the upside Buffalo game that is pretty likely, but just kind of get it the right way if it goes that route where Vegas doesn't keep up and they just blow them out. Most of the priorities, I think, in this one, again, in the passing game, though. Stephon Diggs with a pretty solid game despite a low overall game for Buffalo. 10 catches, 102 yards, a touchdown, 13 targets, so 33.3% of the targets. And then everybody else got 4. A very nice equitable distribution of targets in this offense. With the idea of more targets available, a little bit of an uptick overall for this team, I do think that we see a couple more looks probably for Kincaid. Maybe a couple more looks for Gabe Davis. Maybe, but I mean, Hartree, 22% of the snaps, saw 4 looks. 4 targets, caught 3 of them for 9 yards. Average depth of target was 12.3 yards. He caught 3 passes for 9 yards on 4 targets. That doesn't feel right. That's a weird combination of numbers. 12.3 yard ADOT you would think would lead to more than 9 yards on 3 targets. But anyway, Stephon Diggs, obviously a very, very good downfield weapon. 10.4 yard ADOT. Saw 5 targets, 5 catches over 10 yards. Had an 18 yard long. 2 targets in the red zone. Who's that? It's Adams. He's their prime weapon. And then for me, it's the tight ends. 4 targets apiece for the tight ends. A 1.3 yard ADOT for Kincaid, where Knox got a 7 yard ADOT, a little bit more downfield versus a little bit more safety valve. But I think they'll probably trade those roles back and forth. I think we'll get looks for both of them in the red zone. Knox last year had 6 touchdowns on 517 yards, 7.95 yards per target with a 7.9 yard ADOT. I think that's realistic for just the idea of one of the 2 tight ends is going to continue getting looks, and it'll probably be frustrating for our purposes. But I do think both are in play given how they're priced, 33.31 and 52.54. You can play the price, you can play the ownership game for sure with the 2 tight ends there, though. But I want to have shares of both. On the Vegas side of things, Devontae, obviously your big weapon here. 34.6% of the targets last week. Caught 6 of them for 66 yards. 9 targets total. A 10.6 yard ADOT with 11 yards per catch. 4 over 10 yards with an 18 yard long. Had 1 red zone target, didn't convert. Let's see. What else do we have? Did Renfro didn't go last week? Or is something screwy there? Thought he played. He did play. Why is that screwy? Or was I just looking at the wrong line? No. That's weird. Does Hunter Renfro have a qualifier on his name? Not that I can think of. That's weird. Is he just not in here? Huh. Not Hunter Henry. That's weird. Renfro didn't make the stats board for reasons. All right. He saw 0 targets. Maybe that's why. Yeah, I guess he just didn't make the board because he saw 0 targets, but he played. Well, that's interesting. I hadn't realized that. Anyway, Jacoby Myers out, so I would expect a little bit more involvement for a guy like Hunter Renfro, who I do think is a talented receiver. Last year, Renfro, 5 targets a game, put up 330 yards, 2 TDs, 6.6 yards per catch. Or yards per target, rather. Assuming number 2 status, if Devontae's out there and with no Jacoby Myers, he's got to be involved. This is a weird one. I hadn't noticed that he saw no targets last week. Michael Mayer, their tight end. Well, if he got 0 targets, why the hell is Hunter Renfro not on here? So Hooper got the looks. Carter got 1. Hooper got 1. Jacoby Myers must have gotten... 10. Okay. That's where most of them went on the Vegas side. 38.5% target share for Myers, 10 targets. So assume that most of these get broken up. Probably, a solid handful going Devontae's way and just trying to focus on that option. But assume that the rest of these probably get chopped up between some Hunter Renfro, some Mike Mayer, and then maybe like a DeAndre Carter there. Carter saw 1 target last week. A -2 yard ADOT. That's not impressive. Again, just more, concern about the limited nature of this Vegas offense and their ability to keep up. It's really going to be the Devontae and Jacobs show. And those are really the 2 guys I want. I'm primarily looking at this team for the run back option against my Buffalo stacks. So those are the guys I'm going to want. Pretty straightforward. Didn't get targeted, boosted Jacobs, Adams. Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's really a 2-man focus there. You can have your Renfro darts, you can have your Mayer darts, but primarily we're looking at the 2 volume monsters and the 2 stars on that team, and I think it's justifiably so. Might become simplistic analysis to say it that way, but sometimes that's just the nature of the beast with football. It's like, all right, these are the 2 guys who get all the looks and have all the talent. Sometimes football can be easier to break down than baseball. Where it's like, yeah, this guy does hit 9th, but he's got a 352 on base percentage, and he wraps around to the top of this. Sometimes it's just like, nope, that guy's going to be on the field for 10% of their snaps, and they're not going to throw the ball to him. Don't play him. I like that. I like that about football. Ah, shit. Giants game. Buckle up, Daniel Jones. Solid projection. 21.3 on the FanDuel, on the DK scale, 21.1 on the FanDuel scale. Daniel Jones ranks 4th on the FanDuel board by points, 2nd by points per dollar, same rankings on the DK slate. That makes me completely uncomfortable. I don't like it at all. Going up against a projected 28th ranked defense, Daniel Jones helming a 19th projected by DVOA ranked offense. On the other side of the game, Josh Dobbs helming the 32nd ranked projected DVOA offense against the 19th ranked for the Giants. It's a couple of ugly teams. The Giants are trying to win games. Arizona, not so much. So the Giants at least have that going for them. They've got more talent on their side to an extent. Saquon is a major weapon, projects out pretty well. Darren Waller, major weapon, projects out fairly well. Waller, not as expensive as he should be. 55.66 is pretty affordable for his talent at the tight end position. Should be back to relatively full health. Was out there last week. Definitely is an interesting option. I don't really like any of the other receivers on the Giants. I will have some because just by virtue of how these lineups come together, you have to have some with Daniel Jones. But really, it's very ugly. It's a very mixed bag of quality with Hodgins and Slayton and Campbell and Hyatt and Shepard. Guy's probably going to end up catching 2 touchdowns is Daniel Bellinger. As ugly as that might be. On the Arizona side, I don't think that Connor's uninteresting. He projects out fairly well. Heavily involved running back. Not the greatest situation in the world, but a non-intimidating defense on the other side. I could see James Conner having a pretty decent day feasting on this defense. Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore, both wide receivers not without talent. A little bit of upside there. Zach Ertz, a talented tight end on the back end of the career. He's very, very cheap. Could certainly get in the end zone against the Giants. That's something that he's known how to do throughout the course of his career. So a little bit of potential for Arizona to keep it close. Little bit of potential on the Giants side. Only a 40-point total. I'm going to have this game probably ahead of the field. I don't exactly know where ownership's at, but I'm anticipating some fairly low ownership numbers. So I'll probably get to this game a little bit, as uncomfortable as I am with that. And Danny Dimes, as much as I don't like him, much as I wish he was somebody else's problem at quarterback than mine, I do think for DFS purposes and for season-long fantasy, given his ability in the running game, I do think he's got a little bit of interest, potential. Especially when he projects out well. He wasn't projected at all well last week in that brutal matchup and did not deliver at all in that brutal matchup. 15 of 28 last week for 104 yards. No touchdowns. Not great. 6 intended air yards per attempt. Ended up with 1.8 air yards per attempt. 1 pass in the red zone. Had 3 drops, which weren't helpful at all to him. Going up against a team that was giving up a 4.2 yards per pass attempt. Gave up a defensive touchdown. 7.4 yard defensive ADOT. There should be passing opportunities here. The limited receivers he's got to work with outside of Darren Waller cuts into the upside a little bit. But those guys are capable of catching touchdowns against a fairly limited defense. Joshua Dobbs threw the ball 30 times, completed 70% of his passes. That said, it was for a 3.3 air yard per attempt, 6.4 intended, not exactly slinging the ball downfield, 4.4 yards per pass attempt, 132 yards and 0 TDs overall. Going up against a team that allowed 5.7 yards per pass attempt, 143 yards, 0 TDs last week, 7.2 defensive air yards. Could be an opportunity for Dobbs to throw the ball a little bit, but just kind of a limited overall spot, I think. Probably prefer the ground game with James Conner. Saw 14 attempts on the ground last week, 62 yards. Also caught 5 balls on 5 targets. 12-yard long. Only 0.8 yards after contact, but 3.6 yards before contact per attempt. Not a great option, but one that is supported by the idea that the Giants gave up 4.1 yards per rush attempt, 122 yards, and 3 touchdowns on the ground last week. Definitely a gettable defense. He's going to see volume. He was on the field for 84% of their snaps. He's involved in the pass game. He is a talented guy for only 6,200, 6,400, with the idea that they need some support to stay in this game if they're going to chase Danny Jones and all the craziness he's going to provide on the field. Keontae Ingram, only 11% of the snaps, 5 carries, no targets. And then on the Giants side, it's the Saquon show. Matt Breida saw 23% of the snaps, but only carried the ball twice. Gary Brightwell carried the ball once, 16% of the snaps. These guys are out there in very limited capacity. Saquon, 64% of the snaps, 12 carries, 51 yards. Saw an additional 3 catches on 4 targets. Failed to get in the end zone. but so did most of the Giants. 18-yard long for Saquon. He is their most talented player. They didn't pay him, but he's their most talented player. On the Arizona side for the passing game, Marquise Brown, 3 catches on 5 targets. 3 catches on 3 targets for Rondale Moore. Zach Ertz saw the most volume, but only turned it into 21 yards. 5.6 yard ADOT for Ertz, 2.7 yard ADOT for Rondale, 9.6. The only downfield option was Marquise Brown out of those 3 guys. You did see 4 looks from Michael Wilson with a 16-yard ADOT. I guess that's a little bit interesting if he's going to be a downfield option, 13% of the targets. But really working a lot in and around the line of scrimmage. Kind of a limited passer, kind of a limited passing offense. You can hunt for some touchdowns here for sure. Red zone targets, Ertz got 2. These guys got 1 apiece. I forgot which was in which spot. Marquise Brown had 1. Rondale Moore had 1. So you're kind of touchdown hunting. You're touchdown dependent with any of these plays. If you're going to Dobbs, I think it's just a Dobbs plus 1 at most. And realistically, I think the Arizona side should probably just be used in run back opportunities against a Daniel Jones and Giants stack. In the Giants passing game, Darren Waller did get 5 targets, 5 looks, 17.2% of the target share, and 8-yard ADOT. He was a little bit limited. He was injured all week. Didn't really practice all week going into last week's game. 54% of the snaps. Probably we'll see a little bit more of the snaps. Probably we'll see a few additional targets. Bigger percentage of the targets. Maybe work a little bit more downfield, but the downfield was fine. It was there. Only 1 target in the red zone for anybody, and it went to Paris Campbell of all people. He saw 4 total targets. He hauled in 1 of them for 2 yards. That's really impressive. 4.8 yard ADOT, working mostly around the line of scrimmage. And then you got a lot of kind of guys. Slayton saw 5 targets, 7-yard ADOT. He caught 3 of them for 15 yards. Jalen Hyatt, who was a little bit buzzy going into last week's game, including on our show in our space, saw 1 target, 3.4% target share, 14-yard ADOT, didn't catch it. Sterling Shepard got 1 target, an 11-yard ADOT, didn't catch it. Bellinger saw 1 target. The second tight end did have a 63% snap share. Was out there a fair amount in 12 personnel, but not a priority in the passing game. But he was okay in his limited opportunities last year. 3.2 targets a game, delivered 2 touchdowns, 7.66 yards per target, 268 yards. A very limited option, but a kid who could catch the ball in the end zone for them. As a sneaky play, if you're building out a bunch of giant stacks, you don't want to go to him instead of Waller all that many times. Maybe you mix in 1 in a super deep field tournament. Only in big tournaments. You're not building 1, throwing it into a 100-entry tournament and playing Daniel Bellinger. Probably not the path to success. But just a limited overall passing game. 3 looks for Hodgins. He caught 1 of them. 9.3 yard ADOT. Any one of these guys could get a downfield target. Any one of these guys could convert it into something. They're just super unreliable. They're very cheap. They're easy enough to stack. I think you just kind of rotate through the wideouts. You focus on Jones plus Waller plus Saquon, like we talked about in the chat. For me, that's primarily Jones Waller, and then Jones Saquon as a second. Probably then Jones Saquon and Waller as my third, and then I'll start getting into the wideouts. I really don't like this passing game all that much, but given the way that their quarterback projects, I'm going to have some of it. And it is a good opportunity. A defense that's really not trying all that hard. It's just that you got to have one of these mediocre wideouts complete a pass from Daniel Jones, which is not ideal. Let's move on. Jets and Dallas. Do we have to talk about the Jets? Can we just skip the Jets? You're not playing the Jets, are you? Against Dallas's D? Second projected defense by DVOA. Crushed last time out. I really don't see Zach Wilson leading the Jets to success here. 38-point total overall. Dallas favored by 9.5. A monster spot. One of the more likely blowouts on the board. Kind of sucks. This would have been a fun one. Aaron Rodgers healthy would have been a much more fun game. Zach, pretty inept. 6,200 on FanDuel, 4,900 on DK. Very, very cheap if you want them. Last year, 9 intended air yards per pass attempt, 7 yards per pass attempt, 54.5 yard completion. $4,900 is extremely cheap for a quarterback who does have talent around him. I'll give it that. Garrett Wilson is a very good wide receiver. He projects fairly well despite having to play with Zach Wilson, despite the low implied total. 75-74, it's tough to pay for him when he has to play with Zach Wilson, though. That's your problem for DFS. But 80 yards and a touchdown, not out of the question for Garrett Wilson, obviously, even with Zach Wilson throwing to him. Breece Hall, monster game the other day. Dalvin Cook, tons of talent. Lazard, not without talent. Miko, Randall Cobb. He's got guys to throw to. It's just he's Zach Wilson. That's the real problem. For 49 in gigantic field tournaments, if you wanted to roll the dice a couple times on just like a pairing of this for a total of 12-4 for an average of 6-2, it's all right. Just as a tournament play, just in very large field tournaments, it's not going to win, not going to succeed. Zach Wilson's going to get sacked 6 times and throw 3 picks, 0 touchdowns. You're going to lose with that lineup, but he is very cheap. On the Dallas side of things, I don't know how much I want to get invested in Dallas either. The Jets didn't lose their defense. They lost their offense. Third projected by DVOA. They were pretty good last time out. Kept them in that game. Set it up for them to be able to win it in overtime. Dallas, I'm not the biggest Dak Prescott fan in the world. It's a little bit probably just not liking the guy because I'm a Giants fan and everything creeping in around the edges when I don't like letting that happen. 8.2 intended air yards per pass attempt last year. 7.3 yards per pass attempt. Capable weapons. He's very affordable at 66.74. He projects out 16th by projections, 19th by fantasy points per dollar on FanDuel, 23rd by points per dollar on DK, 16th by DK points. Just going up against a good D. Probably not going to have to do all that much to win this game. Get in the end zone a couple times and let your defense win it for you. I think that's what we're seeing here for Dallas. If I'm going to Dallas, maybe a couple of stacks with Dak and some CD, maybe some Gallup or some Jake Ferguson in there. But really, Tony Pollard is probably the priority on the Dallas side of things. Taking a look at some of the numbers from last week. Dak only threw the ball 24 times, 143 yards, 0 touchdowns. Not great. Zach threw the ball 21 times, 140 yards, and did throw a touchdown. How about that? Still, obviously not a priority. Not an option we want against a team that was getting a 25% blitz rate, 38.6% pressure, and sacked Danny Jones 7 times last week. The Jets got 5 sacks of their own, 24% pressure rate, 22% blitzes. They give up 217 yards through the air and a touchdown and an 8.1 yard defensive ADOT. So that supports a little bit for Dak Prescott, for CeeDee Lamb, of course. But the Jets have a good D, and I think they're going to get a little bit of pressure going. I think it's primarily going to be a ground game on the Dallas side of things. Speaking of, Mr. Pollard, 7,500, 8,000. Fair price, 64% of the snaps, 14 carries for 70 yards, 5 yards per rush attempt, and 2 touchdowns last time out. Not bad. 3.1 yards before contact, 1.9 yards after contact per attempt. Had a 20-yard run, 25-yard long. 3 targets, 2 catches. Was involved, had a target in the red zone. Definitely an opportunity for Tony Pollard. I think there's upside to improve on that game. Obviously, he got in the end zone twice, so we don't have a crazy ceiling to improve on. And he's going up against a defense that was allowing 4.4 yards per rush attempt and 97 yards total last week. No scores on the ground. But probably going to be pretty focused on bottling up the pass. I think there's an opportunity for Pollard to do a little damage here. 6 carries apiece for Deuce Vaughn, Rico Dowdle in the offense. Just kind of limited spelling Tony Pollard. I don't really see any threat to the Pollard play there. 7,500, 8,000. He's fairly priced, if nothing else. Breece put up a monster. 10 carries, 127 yards, 12.7 yards per attempt. Monster game. 9.8 yards after contact per attempt. That's crazy. 2.9 yard before contact. Dalvin was a lot more bottled up. He actually carried the ball more times, 13 carries, but only 33 yards. 1.1 per before contact, 1.5 after contact. Had a 10-yard long. Breece had an 83-yard long, by the way, to support some of that. 2 targets for Brees, 3 for Dalvin. No targets in the red zone for either running back. Obviously, it's a little bit of a committee here. Tons and tons of talent for Brees. Clearly, I mean, if he's not fully healthy and he did that, then, who knows where the ceiling is. But presumably, basically fully healthy for 59.69. Dalvin, 6,000, 6,800. I do think you can go either way with these plays. He'll have his bigger games. But against this Dallas defense, I don't know that I really want to prioritize anybody from the Jets, including the rushers. I do think if you're going to Dallas, you probably want one of these two guys, or they're at least in your rotation of run back plays. But given that they'll split the workload, given they're going up against a stout defense with no passing game to speak of now, kind of limiting overall, I think, for those guys. My primary option from the Jets, I think, is probably still going to be Garrett Wilson. 75-74. It's a fair enough price. Obviously, their primary weapon. 5 targets last week. Got in the end zone last week. 5 catches, only 34 yards. Obviously, that came with Zach Wilson. So this is probably the kind of game we can expect with a little bit of upside for additional yardage. Does he get limited to only 34 yards on 5 catches? If he catches the ball 7 times, does he get out to like 75, 80 yards? He's probably got an opportunity to do that. Excuse me. But overall, it's going to be pretty limited. 6.2 yard ADOT last week. Lazard had a 9.3 yard ADOT. 22% of the targets for Lazard, 27% for Garrett Wilson. It's 5 targets and 4 targets, really. That's what it boils down to. Everybody else pretty limited. Tyler Conklin, the tight end, got 1 look. Randall Cobb got 1. Cobb's very cheap at $34.49, but Cobb and Lazard didn't come here to play with Zach Wilson. So probably a little bit limiting for them. Mecole, I don't think got on the field last week, did he? Mecole Hardman looks like he was dressed, but don't think he played. Maybe he played a little bit on special teams. Certainly didn't get involved in the offense last week. And nobody else really from this passing game should be involved. It's really Garrett Wilson is your top priority Jet, I think, even with the limitations of Zach Wilson. Maybe some Allen Lazard, but very limited as a second banana dart throw. That's about it from the Jets passing game. Straightforward enough on the Dallas side of things. You've got CeeDee as their big play specialist. 9.3 yard ADOT last week, 16% of the targets. Only 4 targets total, though. Only 4 targets for Brandon Cooks for a cheaper price. 10 yard ADOT. But overall, CeeDee's your weapon. 4 catches for 77 yards. Didn't get in the end zone with it, but did have a 49-yard play. Obviously, major downfield upside, major potential. Can break one on a short pass. Can do a lot of things on the field. Michael Gallup, maybe a little bit more involved this week. Only 2 targets last week. Only caught 1 of them for 10 yards. Ferguson did see 7 targets. A 4-yard ADOT, though, working primarily around the line of scrimmage. Caught only 2 of them for 11 yards, too. Kind of disappointing output there from Jake Ferguson. Did see 4 targets in the red zone, though, which is kind of crucial. If you're just touchdown hunting with this offense, Jake Ferguson within your DAX stacks for 33, not a bad option. Maybe you go like Dak, CD, Jake Ferguson in your Dallas stacks as a 2-man. Not bad. To get that many looks in the red zone out of 7 is definitely tells me that he's a priority for when they're looking to score. Shoemaker didn't get on the field last week for any looks. Tolbert, 1 target, was out there for 28% of the snaps. Hendershot is another tight end in that offense, 48% of the snaps, but only 1 target. Kevontae Turpin got 3 targets, caught 2 of them for 11 yards. Some guys who can make some plays, if nothing else, but really limited, I think, for our DFS purposes. Turpin, just on the fact that he got a few targets, did get 3 targets in the red zone. Not completely uninteresting there. Very limited opportunities in this game, though, I think. I just see Dallas running off and hiding. Score twice, you're probably going to win this game. Give me 17 points, I think you win this game. Three games to go. Seattle, Detroit. Should be a good opportunity for some passing in this one. I like the weapons on both sides more than I like the quarterbacks, but I think both quarterbacks capable enough. Jared Goff, solid projection for just 62.73, and then Geno, pretty decent projection for 59.7,000. Geno in particular on the DK slate at 5,900, that's got to be one of our better ranked points per dollar. Geno ranks third by points per dollar on DK, eighth by overall projection, and on FanDuel he ranks first by point per dollar at the quarterback position, seventh by overall projection. Cheap Geno. Not necessarily our favorite quarterback in the world to go to, but very capable receivers to work with. Obviously a good ground game. Going up against a defense that's projected to be 14th, just kind of middle of the road defense. That said, they were generating a pretty significant amount of pressure last week, so Geno's going to have to be kept upright to be able to do anything. Jared Goff working with Amon-Ra St. Brown is obviously a big bonus. A little bit of a split baby in the backfield for these guys. David Montgomery's late touchdown last time out definitely burnt me a little bit. Interesting tight end option in Sam Laporta. Kind of questionable second through fourth wideouts, though, with Marvin Jones, Josh Reynolds, Khalif Raymond. Not the best wide receiver core in the world outside of Amon-Ra. Seattle, Detroit, and Seattle, Detroit. I got to see if there's a way. I mean, I know there's a way. I just got to set it up so that when I select this game, those tabs automatically choose it. Just to speed things up slightly. $17. Yeah, you're right. I had that. I misspoke there, Trey. Good call. Detroit didn't get a lot of pressure last week. 17.8% pressure rate. No sacks. 11% blitz rate. For some reason, I was thinking they were getting a little bit more pressure. Allowed 5.8 yards per pass attempt, 226 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and a 10-yard defensive ADOT. Seattle on the other side allowed an 11.3 yard ADOT, 334 yards through the air with 8.8 yards per pass attempt. They were blitzing 30% of the time, but only got 7% pressure. Give me both these quarterbacks upright and able to throw down the field to interesting receivers. I don't hate this game. 47-point total. Detroit favored by 5, but a team that I definitely want to stack with the idea that they might be playing from behind in one of the higher scoring games of the week. I like the Seattle side. I'm going to have both sides of this one. Appreciate that note, though, Trey. Thank you. So, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. A little bit concerning in terms of the split here. 21 carries for Montgomery, 79% of the action. Gibbs only 27% of the action. 7 carries, 42 yards. Obviously turned the limited carries into a little bit of action on the field. 3.3 yards after contact versus Montgomery's 1.1. 6 broken tackles. Montgomery broke 1. Kid had an 18-yard long versus Montgomery's 8. But Montgomery got the ball into the end zone, which is ultimately really what counts here. Kid was a little bit more targeted. 2 targets versus 0. And so I guess he was a lot more targeted. Not a ton of targets in the ground game there. Primarily reserved for the pass catchers. Kenny Walker on the Seattle side. Pretty big bolstering of faith given the fact that he carried the ball 12 times versus only 3 and 2 for their other 2 backs, who were one a pick with a decent amount of draft capital and then another one who was supposedly leading ahead of the rookie on the depth chart. So the fact that these guys didn't really get all that much volume at all just kind of supports the Kenny Walker play. For 5,800, 6,700, I don't mind getting to a few shares there. He saw 5 targets, caught 4 of them, so he's at least a little bit involved in the passing game. 4.6 yards before contact, only 0.8 yards after contact, 1 broken tackle. Had a 15-yard long. Going up against a defense that was giving up 3.9 yards per rush attempt. It's a little bit of opportunity there, I think. Charbonnet and DJ Dallas, I don't really see it that much. Need to have more volume. I think there's talent in Charbonnet, but if he's not getting a lot of volume here, I kind of can forgo that. Even at a discount, 45-47. Just probably want to ride with Kenny Walker there. And then the passing game, what's actually interesting about both of these teams. 94% of the snaps from Metcalf, 88% of the snaps for Lockett. 2 prime options. DK, not DraftKings, but DK. One of these boards has DK Metcalf with initials. The other one probably without. So Metcalf's A-dot was 15.2. Somebody remember that. So Metcalf had a 15.2 yard A-dot. Lockett had a 12 yard A-dot. They're working downfield. 5 targets for Metcalf, 4 for Lockett. Only 2 catches and 3 catches, 47 yards and 10 yards. They were a lot more limited than we were necessarily expecting in the passing game last week. They each got a look in the red zone. Didn't do a ton with it. But I think there's plenty of upside for both of those receivers. If we look at them from last year, 8.3 targets and 7.3 targets a game. They both went over 1,000 yards. 6 touchdowns for Metcalf, 9 touchdowns for Lockett. Average depth of target or yards per target was a little bit deeper for Lockett, but the average depth of target was a little bit deeper for Metcalf. Both of them were over 10-yard average depth, though. 2 primary weapons down the field. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 5 targets last week, caught 3 of them, 13 yards. Did 59% of the snaps, so he was out on the field a fairly decent amount, was more involved than their tight ends were. So as the third man in, I definitely think he's somewhat interesting, 4,500, 5,200. Get me in the end zone at those prices. I'm pretty happy. Only a 2-yard A-dot, not exactly working downfield, but as the dump out option, pick up a couple targets, a little bit of yardage, and then if we get close, maybe pick up that red zone target, that crucial touchdown, and separate yourself from the 2 guys that everybody's going to be focused on, the 2 guys that, including the defense, everybody's going to be focused on. I don't hate that option when he got that many snaps, when he was out on the field and a little bit involved. The tight ends, kind of more limited here. Noah Fant didn't play. 2 targets apiece for Disley and Colby Parkinson. Don't really love any of those options. Any one of them could get that red zone look, could get that touchdown, but you're really just touchdown hunting with the 3 tight ends. So really, it's pretty straightforward in terms of the options that you want in the passing game here. It's really the 3 wideouts, primarily these 2, obviously. You can play them together in stacks for sure. Enough volume to support it for both of them. Not enough opportunity for a touchdown for both of them. And they're fairly priced. They're not crazy expensive. Amon-Ra, 6 catches for a touchdown, 71 yards on 9 targets, 28% of their volume, a 6.7 yard A-dot, 11.8 yards per catch. He's Amon-Ra. He does Amon-Ra things. 1 red zone target. Gotta love the option, 7,800, 8,100. Going up against a defense that allowed 334 yards passing and an 11.3 defensive A-dot last week, 8.8 yards per pass attempt. Definitely seems like an opportunity for Amon-Ra to catch the ball pretty frequently, pretty far down the field with some upside for scoring. Sam Laporta at the tight end position, 5 targets last week, turned it into 5 catches, 39 yards, a 15.6% target share. Only a 4-yard A-dot, another tight end just kind of working around the box, but pretty decent receiver, a pretty decent game there. 14-yard long, didn't see any looks in the red zone, but definitely some opportunity for 3,900, 5,100 too. The price is at least right. Marvin Jones, now we get a little bit ugly. Did see 6 targets, caught 2 of them for 8 yards. Yikes. 7 targets for Josh Reynolds, caught 4 of them, had 80 yards. 10-yard A-dot, not terrible, probably the third option there. I prefer Amon-Ra in the tight end, and then probably Reynolds. Khalif Raymond, 1 target, 20 yards, 2.7% target share, but it was at least downfield, 17-yard A-dot. Not great in terms of the secondary, tertiary, and 4th option on the board here. 2 targets for Brock Wright at the tight end position. Kind of a non-factor. So it's really 1 with a bullet, number 2, and then pick your poison with the other 3 wideouts. But Reynolds probably makes the most sense, saw the most snaps, saw the most targets, did the most with them. Talked about that. We talked about that. Miss anything? Nope. Think we got it. Only a couple games to go, gang. We're going to beat last week's 4-hour time by a pretty wide margin. Still going 2 hours 25, though. Not bad. We're up around the length of your average Marvel movie. King of Smack, Kelly and AJ Dillon are in smash spots if Aaron Jones is out for Green Bay and Eckler's out for the Chargers. Yeah, I don't disagree. It's definitely going to create opportunities for both of those guys to soak up a lot of the volume in that game, in that ground game. That said, I kind of prefer the passing game in both of those situations. I just don't love either running back in terms of Kelly and Dillon, but definitely the volume will be there. And I think Eckler's almost definitely out. Aaron Jones seems a lot more legitimately questionable. The last report I saw said that Eckler wasn't even traveling with the team. If you're getting ownership on those plays too, especially Kelly, the more that ownership ticks up, the more, and the fact that we just want to have the passing game in that offense, the further I can get away from it. But it's a valid point, King of Smack. St. Brown about to go off. Yeah, I like that call a lot better. Trey says sneaky shootout for Goff. Yeah, I like that. I like that game for the passing upside for sure. Let's get this one teed up. So, do we think we get away with Puka again here, or does he just run into a buzzsaw with this San Francisco D? I tend to lean toward the latter. I think this Los Angeles offense could be in a little bit of trouble here. San Francisco, fifth projected defense DVOA, sixth offense. On the Rams side of things, 22nd ranked offense, 30th ranked defense. Could be a field day for a Debo. Another field day for an Ayuk. McCaffrey. A lot of options on that San Francisco side. George Kittle, not the least of the problems for Los Angeles. Definitely strongly favor the San Francisco side. My concern is, again, with this one, despite the 46-point total, I could see this game easily being a first half game. San Francisco gets up by 3 scores and just puts them to bed with the defense and just kind of grounds it into dust. In which case you'd obviously have opportunities for McCaff, probably some Debo still. Maybe Elijah Mitchell even picks up a couple of looks in that just, grinding it down kind of an offense where they're not really concerned about giving McCaffrey plays. I love this. NFL injury alert. I don't know if you guys can see that. Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers, Achilles, is aiming for a potential playoff return. Good luck. 39-year-old tore his Achilles, wants to come back by January, when every doctor in the world is like, yeah, maybe next year. Apparently he thinks that the healing sonic frequencies of dolphins having sex is going to heal his Achilles. I guess you just sit there with your foot in the pool while the dolphins are doing it, and their sounds just bounce off your leg and magically heal your tendons. Think he came up with that one while he was on ayahuasca? Yeah. Aaron Rodgers isn't coming back this year. I'm sorry to break it to you, Jets fans. It's just not happening. Unless he gets a bionic leg, which isn't completely out of the question. So talking about this one, Stafford, again, just going into that San Francisco defense, I don't love the opportunity for a very limited LA club anyway. The ground game here just sucks. Cam Akers, Kyron Williams, I don't really like either one of those options. Kyron is at least cheap, but you're going to smash him right into the pretty stout San Francisco defense. Puka obviously was a star last week, projects out pretty well on the board again for a player who only costs $4,900, $5,800. Given the nature of what he was doing in the offense, could he go out there and have a decent game, break a couple plays on short targets and so on and so forth? Sure, he could. I think he is a very talented kid. That's why we were on him going into last week. But it just doesn't seem like the right spot this week, especially if the field gets carried away, if people start going to this offense, if they start going to him, start going to Tutu. I don't really like it. I think I can leave the Rams on the board pretty easily this week. Dennis says, I think he has a better shot at healing than the Jets do at being in playoff contention in January. That's an excellent point. That's actually true. It's very easy to just be like, yeah, I'll come back for the playoffs. Why not? When you have no faith that they're going to make the playoffs. And then just say like, yeah, I would have been ready. It's actually pretty much exactly what Aaron Rodgers is doing. Stay off the magic mushrooms, Aaron, says Obi-Wan. So breaking this one down a little bit, Brock Purdy last week threw the ball 29 times. Stafford threw it 38 times. Obviously, you've got volume in this passing game, but you're going to be playing from behind, and they're just not all that great. Didn't get any passes into the end zone. Did have 8.9 yards per attempt, 10.8 intended air yards per attempt. Throwing the ball downfield, 18 attempts over 10 yards, 6 over 20, 2 over 30, and 1 look over 40. Going up against the defense that got pressure 46.2% of the time and picked up 5 sacks last week. Kind of limiting. 3.9 yards per pass attempt, 198 yards and a touchdown. For Brock Purdy, I don't really fully believe, trust, have faith, etc. in Brock Purdy, but I love all the talent around him. So if that leads me into a few stacks of San Francisco, so be it. But I kind of view them a little bit more as like one-off plays. As like, I want some Christian McCaffrey. I want some Debo. I want some George Kittle. I want some Brandon Ayuk this week. After we talked about it last week, that drove me bananas. I would have had such a better week if I didn't have like 3 shares of Brandon Ayuk after I raved about him last week. That was the one that I missed in terms of everything we talked about. I had everything else. Everything else. That would have been key. Rodgers got an internal brace called the speed bridge on his Achilles. I have no idea what that does. Obviously, it sounds like it brings you back more quickly. I wish him luck. I would be more fun if he was here. Let's put it that way. I think Dennis nailed it, though. The fact that the Jets just won't be in the playoffs. Unless they trade for this guy. That could carry them. That was supposedly a rumor. So many different things for the Jets. Colin Kaepernick. Look, Colin Kaepernick got screwed. No matter what you think of his stances or anything like that, the fact that he never got an opportunity and just got run out of the league like that when he clearly had talent and clearly had more talent than a lot of quarterbacks, that sucked. He got screwed. Should he, could he, would he try and come back now? He apparently reached out to the Jets. It would be a disaster. He hasn't played in like 7 years at this point. It would be a disaster. Mamba says, me too, and he's from Detroit. We'll forever remember week 1. Obi says that would be interesting. Yeah, that'd be a mess. I wish he'd gotten an opportunity. I really do. A lot of those years I was saying, like, yeah, it makes some sense for one of these shit teams to go out and just give him a shot. Skilled guy. But the further and further we got from the last time he played in the NFL, the more and more unrealistic that became. And now we're just, it's complete crazy. So if you're really over the moon about going to the Los Angeles offense, you obviously can get some volume out of Stafford slinging the ball. They're going to be playing from behind. They're probably going to be a lot of opportunity to throw it, which is why I'm not really enamored with a Cam Akers, Kyren Williams kind of a combination. Akers carried the ball last week 22 times and gained 29 yards. That's difficult to do. 1 rushing touchdown, 0.7 yards before contact, 0.6 yards after contact per attempt. Did break 4 tackles, had a 12-yard long. Pretty limited in the ground game, though. Kyren Williams, he saw more of the snaps, 65% of the snaps. He carried the ball 15 times, 52 yards, 2 touchdowns. If you're touchdown hunting, maybe you can pick one of these guys off for 5,059 for Kyren Williams across sites, 57.59 for Cam Akers. I don't like it. I think there's just so many better spots to go to for your running back situation here. Why tangle with it? It just, when you don't know where the volume's going, when you're talking about a team that gave up 41 yards on the ground last week, 4.1 yards per attempt, it just doesn't seem like the right spot for Cam Akers, Kyren Williams. Christian McCaffrey, on the other hand, 8,900, 9,500. You could play him in stacks. You could play him on his own. 22 carries, 152 yards last week, a touchdown. 2 yards before contact, 4.9 yards after contact. Monster per attempt. Saw 5 targets, 3 catches. An absolute fantasy monster for the money. Totally worth going to. Even if you think this team is going to be playing out ahead of this game and kind of socking it away in the second half, I think Christian McCaffrey's got tons of value. Top priority guy in this offense for me. Elijah Mitchell, 15% of the snaps, didn't really see any volume. The idea that maybe second half running could support a little bit more upside, a few more carries for Elijah Mitchell, sure. But does that make him a DFS play? Not really. Oops. So we saw Puka last week, 78% of the snaps, 10 targets, 119 yards, 10 catches, 15 targets, 40% of the target share, a 9.6 yard A dot. Obviously a dynamic receiver, did a lot of interesting things, had a 21-yard long, got a red zone target. Definitely an interesting kid. Just think they're going to get bottled up this week. I don't like the opportunity for LA just across the board. Tutu saw 79% of the snaps. He also gained 119 yards on 6 catches. Saw 8 targets, 21.6% target share, 15.8 yard A dot. Higbee, he got 3 targets, 49 yards. Caught all 3 of them, only 8.1% of the target share, but again, downfield, 12.3 yard A dot, 16.3 yards per catch. 11.4 yard A dot for Van Jefferson. 5 targets, 4 catches, only 24 yards. Did get in the end zone. I just don't really have faith. Outside of just volume, I don't have that much faith in their ability to convert a lot again. Could get there for one of these guys on volume. Primarily like one of their top options up here. But I think it's going to be a lot more limited than it was last week. On the San Francisco side, Brandon Ayuk off the top, 85% of the volume last week, 129 yards, 2 TDs, monster game. 85% of the snaps, rather, 28.6% of the volume. They spread it out fairly well between their 3 big options. 28%, 8 targets for Ayuk, 7 targets, 25% for Debo, 6 targets, 21.4 for George Kittle, and then not that much left for anybody else. McCaff got most of the others. 5.2 yard A dot for Kittle. We're just looking for him to get in the end zone. Saw the red zone target. Didn't score, but obviously a prime option at the tight end position. Debo, 5 catches for 55, 7 targets, 10.4 yard A dot, 11 yards per catch. 22 yard long. So one big play really. But Debo obviously another big play type weapon for this team. In last year's version of this offense, Kittle had 11 TDs and 8.9 yards per target, 6.5 yard A dot. And where is he? Debo. There he is. Debo only a 4.3 yard A dot, 632 yards, 6.7 yards per target, 2 touchdowns. Ayuk got in the end zone 8 times last year. So a lot of what we saw last week, I think, just kind of holds up to who these guys are and how they play the game. I do think it supports another good week for potentially for Ayuk, but obviously a lot of mouths to feed in the San Francisco offense. And again, if they run off and hide in terms of putting up 3 first-half scores, and all 3 of those scores don't come from the same guy DFS-wise, it becomes a little bit more limiting if they're just looking to sock the game away late in the second half. But definitely good options on this side. More limited on this side. This is the kind of shitty part about doing it alphabetically. We've got to end with the Washington-Denver game. I should set it up so it's alphabetically, but leading up, or I could do it by implied score, I guess, or like by game score. That might be a more fun way to set up the board next week. Just do it in like descending order or ascending order rather. Start with the lowest game score, and then go up. I kind of like that idea. I'm gonna try and remember that. The battle everybody's been waiting for. Russ Wilson, Sam Howell. I almost forgot Sam Howell's name. That's how much I've been waiting for this one. 39-point total. Denver favored by 3.5. I greatly prefer the Denver side. I do think Russ Wilson is pretty much not shot, but something's up. And I don't know how much he ends up coming back to earth. That said, they threw the ball a decent amount. 34 pass attempts last week. He completed 27 of them. 177 yards and 2 touchdowns without Jerry Jeudy, without his primary receiver. Kind of slow-paced, but high volume in terms of passing. And I think we can expect that again and probably through the entire season. Just kind of the nature of what their offense is going to be. Getting Jerry Jeudy back is obviously a boon to the Russ Wilson play. 6.7 targets a game last year for Jerry Jeudy and 11.5 yard A dot. Got in the end zone 6 times, 972 yards, 9.72 per target. One of their prime weapons and one of the better overall downfield receivers in the NFL. Just a very good, very talented receiver when he's healthy and on the field. A little bit of problem staying out there a lot of the time. Javonte Williams, Samaje Perine, a little bit of a two-headed running back situation. Both talented guys, both saw involvement in the offense last week. Little bit difficult to nail down where it's going to go. Similarly priced guys. I think if you're going to Denver a lot of times, you can mix and match those two options as your running backs. I think they play okay in the stack. They also play okay as a run back to a Washington stack. Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims. Mims a little bit more limited than we were expecting, given that Judy was out the last week. Sutton saw a decent amount of volume. Little Jordan Humphrey got involved a little bit. Was a guy that Sean Payton knew from previous, New Orleans. So potentially could stay involved a little. Troutman, similar story. But kind of limited options down the depth chart. I do like basically these guys on the Denver side of things, though. On the Washington side, Terry McLaurin, John Dotson, a couple of good receivers. Antonio Gibson, decent receiving back. Curtis Samuel, interesting third receiver there. Not a bad projection for a guy who only cost $4,000 on the DK slate. 5,900, a lot more comparable to Dotson and McLaurin on FanDuel. But a little bit of separation price-wise for Curtis Samuel there on the DK slate. Not completely uninteresting. Going up against a 17th projected defense versus on the other side, the Broncos going up against a 4th ranked projected defense. Neither one of these offenses projected to be that great, but there are some talented players on both sides here. Again, going back to the board here, Russ did have a 4-yard intended air yards per attempt last week, despite throwing 7 balls over 10 yards, 2 over 20. Probably goes up a little bit with Jerry Jeudy back in the fold here. Did have 7 attempts in the red zone, 2 touchdowns, so he converted 2 of them. I almost said pitch. Did throw the ball pretty efficiently. 79% of his completed 79% of his passes, 27 of 34. Going up against a defense that only allowed 3.5 yards per attempt, 114 yards, though, and 0 touchdowns with a 6.4-yard ADOT. Blitzed a decent amount. Didn't generate a ton of pressure, but generated 3 sacks last week. Russ has to be kept on his feet for sure, but he's got some weapons to throw to. I don't mind the option. Howell, a little bit more limited overall. 31 attempts, completed 19 of them, 61%, 202 yards and a touchdown. 7.5-yard intended air yards per attempt, going up against a defense that did allow 7.7 yards per pass attempt and a 7-yard ADOT with 2 touchdowns and 200 yards last week. It's a little bit on the board, a little bit of reason to have faith in Howell here. Maybe he has an okay game. He's definitely got some weapons to work with. For 54.69, not entirely off the board. One of your lower probability quarterbacks overall. He ranks 20th and 22nd by points and points per dollar on FanDuel, 20th and 20th on DK. So again, not a priority option by any means. Given where he ranks, that probably takes him out of consideration for me. Pretty limited in terms of the projection. I might have to make sure his back end is okay. Let me write him down too. What do you do with that pen? Whatever. I thought this was a pen. Little vape cartridge. I lost my pen. I'll try and remember. I'll take a look at Sam Howell's back-end projection, see if there's another 2 points that could be squeezed out of him there. It would increase his value a little bit. I'm not going to put my thumb on it, don't get me wrong. I just want to make sure that the back-end looks like it should. But, yeah, kind of a limited option. Javonte Williams last week, 45% of the snaps. Samaje Perine, 45% of the snaps. That's not ideal. 13 carries versus 8 carries. 6 targets for Williams, 4 targets for Samaje, but Samaje ran more routes. They both caught 4 passes. On the ground, 3.5 yards after contact per attempt for Javonte Williams, 4.3 yards after contact for Samaje. Both guys look pretty good. Williams looked a little bit better than I was expecting. Did gain 52 yards on 13 carries, 4 yards per attempt. Samaje outgained him, 5.1 yards per attempt, 41 on 8 carries. It seems like a situation that's going to be pretty split fairly evenly. I like both options as like dart throws. I think they're both playable guys in stacks, given that they were involved in the passing game, given that they've both got a little bit of big playability. I don't really have a preference between the two. I would probably just play the ownership and the price game, in which case it would lead me a little bit more towards Samaje. But I think they're both mid-range, okay options. I'd rather have them a little bit cheaper, but they're fine. They're involved enough. It's just the fact that they might cannibalize one another in terms of the ceiling that makes me a little concerned. Brian Robinson saw 61% of the snaps, most of the volume on the ground with 19 carries, 3.1 yards per attempt, 2.8 before contact, but only 0.3 after contact, 7-yard long. Did get in the end zone receiving. Saw 2 targets, caught one of them for a touchdown, 1 red zone target. Gibson only saw 1 target last week. I didn't realize that. 35% of the snaps for Gibson, 3 carries, 1 target. Not great. 1 reception. Last year he was a lot more involved. Last year, 3.9 targets a game, 353 yards through the air, 2 touchdowns, 6.09 targets, and carried the ball, rush attempts per game, 9.9 times a game, 36.4 yards. So he was a lot more involved last year, scored 3 touchdowns. I would expect that through the course of the season we see him get a little bit more involved, but obviously they want to make Brian Robinson the focal point of the rushing attack, I think, at this point. So maybe he sees a little bit less volume than we were expecting, Gibson, and makes Brian Robinson just kind of the primary. 52-65, playable part. Not ideal, but a playable part. I think I favor the passing game a little bit. If we're looking at the passing game for Washington, 89% of the snaps and 87 for their top 2 with McLaurin and Dotson. Pretty clear cut. 4 targets for McLaurin, 7 for Dotson. McLaurin only caught 2 of them versus Dotson's 5. An 11-yard ADOT versus a 9.1 and 15.5 yards per catch for McLaurin. So did a little bit with the ball once he caught it, but was a little bit more limited in terms of the targets and only caught half his targets. Curtis Samuel, like I said, kind of interesting, a little bit sneaky for cheap as the third man in this offense. He saw 5 targets, so he got 1 more look than Terry McLaurin did. Did a little bit more with him. Caught all 5 balls for 54 yards. Only a 5.4 yard ADOT. A little bit closer to the action. No looks in the red zone last week, but again, limited sample, obviously, with just 1 game under their belts. Going up against the team against Denver that gave up 2 touchdowns through the air last year and a 7.7 yards per attempt. I think there's upside for the passing game. It's primarily around these 3. And then Logan Thomas, not completely uninteresting as a tight end. 8 targets last week, only caught 4 of them. Typically a little bit better than that, but led the team in target share at 27.6%, 5.9 yard ADOT. A little bit more safety valve-ish, given that ADOT, but should see some red zone looks. Should have some opportunities to get into the end zone. Diami Brown, John Bates just didn't even see any targets. Saw plays. They were out there, but didn't see the ball thrown their way. On the Denver side, like I said, Judy is the most interesting receiver for me. 6.7 targets a game last year, 6 touchdowns, 972 yards. But you do have interesting options. Sutton got in the end zone, saw 5 targets, caught 4 of them for 32 yards, a 7.6 yard ADOT last week, 15-yard long, and saw 1 target in the red zone. Marvin Mims, a lot more limited than I think we were expecting with Judy out. Only saw 2 targets, only out there for 27% of the snaps. Lil Jordan Humphrey saw 70% of the snaps. Same target share, 2 targets. Caught both of them for 11 yards and got in the end zone. Just given the familiarity, maybe we see Lil Jordan a little bit more than we were thinking, at least early on. Concerning on the volume, concerning on the snap share for Marvin Mims for sure. Seemed like a guy we were going to be able to go to in this offense, but now with Judy coming back with that limitation, the idea that it might be Judy, Sutton, Lil Jordan on the depth chart, that's concerning for Mims shares. Troutman saw 5 targets, caught all 5 of them, didn't get in the end zone, 3.6 yard ADOT. Again, another guy just kind of working around the line of scrimmage. Did see two red zone targets, though. That's not uninteresting. Brandon Johnson got on the field 50% of the snaps, so he also out-snapped Marvin Mims. He only saw 3 targets, caught 2 of them. Did see a red zone target, though. 15.5 yards after the yards per catch, 11 yard ADOT. He was their primary downfield weapon last week in his 3 targets. Just a weird look at their passing game given that their primary receiver was out. I expect it to take a pretty different shape this week. Probably be these 2 as your primaries. And then Troutman is not uninteresting given all the opportunities that he saw. Lil Jordan's your wild card. 3,100, 4,100. If he's out there for 70% of the snaps again and they throw to him, you're going to need a few more catches. Give me 4 catches, 30-plus yards, and another touchdown. And maybe I'm okay at 31-41. Not a good option by any means. Super large field DFS type guy, last banana. very little salary left to spend, maybe you get there. Was that it? Only 2 hours and 50 minutes? That's all? Surely there's more to talk about. There is more to talk about. Stop calling me Shirley. Dennis says, whose back end are you putting your thumb on? Make sure you ask first. I see what you did there. So that's it, gang. That's the top to bottom. That's the slate in and out as much as we can do with it anyway. I think it's a really interesting one. Top stacks. I think if you're looking for top stacks, I think it is an easy way to just pull up the quarterback board with the projections, the rankings, and then just kind of go by how those quarterbacks rank out. That informs very much of the situation there. Like a guy like Geno, he's 7th ranked for points, but 1st overall points per dollar on FanDuel, 3rd overall points per dollar on DK. I think he makes a very compelling option against that Detroit offense. The obvious names up at the top, like Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Justin Herbert. I think that Chargers offense is probably my favorite of the week, just given how much Tennessee is going to allow them to throw the ball. A lot of concerns around that Giants projection for Daniel Jones, but he's up board. He's got a couple weapons to work with. You got some dynamic scorers like Justin Fields who can create his own offense. Joe Burrow, obviously, major upside, ranks out pretty well for both points and value. Trevor Lawrence on the other side of the KC game shouldn't be denied. I run into a little bit more problems around like Lamar. FanDuel, he's easier to play. 7,600 over there, ranks 7th by quarterback points per dollar. On DK, he's 9th ranked by points on both sites. On DK, he drops to 17th by points per dollar. I get concerned around plays like that. Probably prefer a little bit of Jared Goff, a little bit of Russ Wilson, 11th and 10th ranked points per dollar on DK. Josh Dobbs, I don't think is playable, despite he lands at 6th because he's so cheap. But I don't think he's playable. There is a little bit that needs to be paid attention just to the pure projection, the pure upside. That said, he's going up against the Giants. He's got a couple guys to throw to. Crazier things have happened, but I don't think he's going to be in my player pool. 12th on FanDuel, thankfully, in points per dollar. So I think that's an easy way to kind of start building your stacks, and then pull up the groups in the stacks article. Go through that. I'll have an update in tomorrow that'll account for any additional injuries. I'll try and work in some recommended boosts. I'll try and add some stuff around, these are my sneaky plays, these are my favorite plays. Maybe I'll punch up a little article with some picks or something so that we can try and capture some of the guys like we talked about, like the Pukas and the Ayuks and so on of last week. That'll also just kind of help me get it sorted in my own head so that I don't miss out on Ayuks. But yeah, keep an eye on the site, gang. Jump into the Discord, ask some questions in there. With that, gonna wish everybody good luck. Somebody out there go win something. Go win yourself $1 million this week. That's how we, for all the word of mouth, all the conversations we can do, all the slow burn and the slow builds and the, just spread the word gradually. Don't make a big deal out of it, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody go out there and win $1 million. That'll spike some viewers for next week's show. That'll get us a few more followers. Somebody go win something. Good luck out there, gang. I'll be around. Hit me up if you got questions. I'll be chatting with some of you, I'm sure, in the Discord. But, yeah, good luck. Probably nothing on the air tomorrow. I don't need to compete necessarily head-to-head with the shows that everybody's going to be watching. But, you never know. While I'm building lineups, if I get bored, I might jump on. Who knows? With that, guys, I think I've said with that, guys, like 4 times already now. So I'm actually going to punch out this time. Going to start building some lineups, messing around, getting into this slate. I'll see you later.